We are back for another Sunday night. It is Sunday night AstroLive. I am joined by the weather cat right here. Here she is, Miss Peaches. The astrological cat is sitting next to me on the computer bag. He's dreaming the show into existence. So, how is everybody this evening as we gather together again for another chat on astrology here on I would say it's a kind of, I wouldn't say balmy. I'd go with maybe muggy, warm, windy. I would go with high positive ion count. This does not feel like a high negative ion count. However, it could go that way. I feel like it could like flip. But we'd have to get a bit of a different change in the weather pattern. Isn't that right, Peaches? Isn't that right, Peaches? Yeah. She's waiting for those negative ions to come bursting through. So how was everybody's weekend? We'll do a little roll call here in chat in a minute. We had the Sun-Uranus conjunction, and there was a pretty major explosion on Saturday. I don't know if you guys caught it, but there was a major explosion in California. And let me see if I can find it. Let's see what we have here. Hold on. All right, let's just go explosion, because I saw this across the ticker. Yeah, so here we go. This was kind of a strange place. One dead, 4 hurt in Palm Springs car explosion deemed act of terrorism by the FBI. Have you guys seen this? Okay, this is weird. Let's bring this up here. Hold on. I got to. No, I don't want that. Let me bring this up here. This is what I was talking about with explosive energy. And this happened, I believe, on Saturday, if I'm not mistaken. Let me see if you guys can find it or see that. Yeah, I've always got to burn one. I've always got to burn the first share. And then I get to come back and it will do what I want it to. Yeah, right here is what I'm talking about. 1 dead, 4 hurt in Palm Springs car explosion, deemed act of terrorism by FBI. 4 people were injured in the blast, which a fertility clinic said on social media took place in a parking lot near its building. 1 person is dead after a car exploded outside of a fertility. Isn't it interesting, too, that Taurus is a sign that is connected to fertility? And Uranus is definitely explosive. Akil Davis, Assistant Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Los Angeles Field Office, said at a news conference Saturday evening the nature and seriousness of the injuries were not disclosed. Interesting. Late Saturday, multiple law enforcement tactical officers were seen outside a residence in 29 Palms. That is a military town, by the way, if you're not familiar with it. About 1 hour away from the Palm Springs fertility clinic. Interesting. Several buildings were damaged, some severely, Mills said on Facebook, noting that the blast field stretches blocks. Davis said the debris field stretches at least 250 yards To put that into perspective, that's 2.5 football fields. It covers several blocks in all directions. This was not a leftover from New Year's fireworks. This was a powerful explosion. Davis called the blast significant and said it was likely one of the largest bombing investigations the FBI has been involved in Southern California. He compared it to the Aliso Viejo bombing in 2018. Make no mistake, this is an international act of terrorism. How do they know it's an international act? How do they know it's international? I mean, didn't it happen here in the United States? And how do they define terrorism? Davis said he later noted that the investigation will determine whether, okay, well, he just said that it's an international act of terrorism, but then the investigation will determine if it's a domestic or international. Why would you go ahead and say that? Why wouldn't you just say that we'll have to investigate this to see if this is either a domestic or international act of terrorism? It's sort of like he said it, and then somebody shot him a memo and said, hey, look, dude, let's figure out which way we want to push this. Okay? Maybe if it's a domestic terror act, it might help us out a little bit more. So let's retract that. All right, so here we go. Interesting numbers. The blast occurred at 1199 North Indian Canyon. Dr. Mills said at around 11 a.m. So now we got 11s. We got 2 of them, right? We got 29s, 21s. We got a 9/11 buried in there as well. 11/9. You take that 9, you put it over here, move around, right? And apparently, there was, what was it? It was something. We'll get to the Trump thing and the Comey thing with 8647. And there's like a major, a really significant number between that day and 9/11/2001. Okay, so this is what the blast looked like. There is no information yet on possible, including whether a nearby fertility clinic was targeted. What appears to be the fertility clinic, American Reproductive Centers. Car exploded in the parking lot near its building. No one who works at the center was armed. The lab at ARC, which houses all eggs, embryos, and reproductive materials, was not damaged. We are heavily conducting a complete safety inspection and have confirmed that our blast operations in sensitive medical areas were not impacted by the blast. Mayor Pro Tem Naomi Soto called the clinic a place of hope where people go to start or expand their families. Okay, here we go. Here we go. Let's go a little bit further. The LGBT Community Center of the Desert said its McDonald Wright building sustained minor damage from the explosion and that it would be closed until further notice. Out of an abundance of caution, the FBI Los Angeles Bureau said on X that investigators, bomb technicians, et cetera, evidence response team were at the scene. Okay. This is what I think is interesting. It's bombing a clinic It won't stop people from needing or wanting reproductive care, whether it's IVF or an abortion. I will keep working to ensure everyone can get the care they need without fear. This is Sarah Jacobs. She's a Democrat. Okay, so there's a couple things going on here with this. All right, go back to where they said that it was an international act of terror, and then he kind of walks it back because they may want to play the domestic card if they need to. Okay. Now we have the LGBTQ community center of the desert in proximity with the reproductive clinic. That's really interesting. Now, a lot of people would make the assumption that IVF is only for straight or heterosexual couples. That's not completely true. And let me rephrase this. That the fertility methods that are used to create a child that is not going to be created or consummated through the sexual act, right? Or people who need help in order to do that, to boost fertility, or to find a surrogate for their babies, which are in that zip code, right? They're in that zip code. It's not just something that's going to be shared by straight heterosexual couples. So there's a lot of things that could happen in that reproductive center. You could have women who are in a relationship with another woman and they want to have a child. Or you would think that would be easy. Just, find a donor, right? And I don't know what this reproductive clinic does. Maybe they do that. Men who want to have a surrogate woman carry their baby to term, their baby, right? Perhaps this clinic can do that as well. I don't know fully what they do. But if they're in proximity with this center, one could make a case that there would be some degree of cross-pollination with these two worlds. Now, again, I don't know if they have a similar center in a place. Well, this is Palm Springs. So this is probably the center in Palm Springs. Palm Springs has a really high male gay, homosexual community. And I'm assuming a number of those guys want kids. And I would bet that this center, the American Reproductive Center, which is, you're going to find out on Facebook, probably is involved in that business. It is the Abdallah family. Interesting. The Abdallah family. At ARC, we believe in creating life, not just in a biological sense, but in the emotional and spiritual sense too. What does that mean? We see this moment as a reminder to hold loved ones close, to show kindness whenever possible. We continue our work with even more intention and heart. From adversity, we choose hope. It will be fully operational on Monday morning. What is this place? Well, there's a lot of people praying for him. Let me see if I can do this. You don't want to see my Facebook page. It's been forever since I found it. Been there. Okay, let's do this. American Reproductive Centers. I'm wondering if it's like a chain or something. Let me just see this. American Reproductive Centers. It is it's the only one that I can see, and this is their webpage. Services. Here's their webpage. Let's just take a look at this. Male and female fertility evaluation. What was that? What was their service here? Hold on. In-house egg donation, surrogacy, intrauterine insemination, pre-implantation, egg freezing. This is a full service operation right here. What else? More? Interesting. So, male and female. Okay. I don't know. I think that robotic and advanced endoscopic surgery. Okay. There's just one. We're happy to answer all your questions. Anyway, I think that there's something going on here with this. Now, astrologically, again, we're dealing with Taurus. We're dealing with birth, right? Taurus is the great mother. It is the great mother, and the conception starts in the 8th house. God, that's so weird. Okay, so they have another one. They've got a couple of these. There's one in 1199 North Indian Canyon. There's another one in Redlands at 255 Terracina. And then the other one is at 330 South Magnolia. So you've got the 33 and the 1199. Anyway, conception starts in the 8th house, which is Scorpio, right? That's where it starts. And then eventually it heads to the 2nd house, which is Taurus. Now, there's a stop on the 1st house because the baby's got to come in, take a breath, and get its astrological assignment. But it's not long before it arrives in the 2nd house, and that's when the mothering starts from the first moment, obviously. But Taurus is really the flesh, right? Taurus is the flesh, and Scorpio is the seed, right? Is the seed in the egg, and Taurus is the flesh. So that's interesting because we have this explosion. Literally, Sun-Uranus conjunction explosion happened at this clinic. Now, who wanted to bomb this clinic? If this is indeed the clinic, and there is a LGBTQ center in proximity to the clinic, maybe it was someone who didn't want how do we say this? Scientific biology to intercede in the act of natural reproduction. In other words, maybe there were people who did not want gays to be able to rent out a womb or something along those lines, because they're involved in surrogacy, and there is a pretty high gay population in Palm Springs. So, you know, we always talk about, like, okay, how does astrology line up to a mundane event? Well, this was a mundane event, right? This is totally a mundane event, or a collective or world event. And then on the 15th, now, if you go back, David and I talked about this on our show. David and I talked about this, and I talked about it before the show, but we both talked about it. And I was the one, you know, that brought it up months ago. David and I got into it, and it was that Mars transit to Trump's Pluto in his 12th house. I said, keep your eye on Trump, you know, mid-May. And of course, the Comey thing pops. 86-47. Like, get him out, kill him. That's what it means, right? So that definitely falls into kind of, you know, the assassination, certainly assassination symbolism, right? Mars on Pluto. Now, I guess Comey has got to go ask some tough questions, right? Answer some tough questions. All these guys skate. But at the very least, right, he's kind of letting out, hey, let's take out the president. I was right there mid-May. Mid-May. And I'm not sure Trump is completely out of the woods yet. But so, yeah, we're just looking back on some of these things that we talked about. That's a very interesting explosion. All right, let's just go through a quick little meet and greet we have a lot to talk about with Saturn and Aries tonight, and I'm going to jam on that. Also, I asked a number of people over on Twitter who were born during a very specific period of time. It was the Saturn Chiron conjunction in opposition with Uranus Pluto in Virgo. This was like 1965 to 66. It's a very, very unusual conjunction. Only happened during those 2 years, and they did kind of a poll on people who went through that. And I'm gonna go. It wasn't really a poll; it was more of an informal survey. And I want to go through some of those responses tonight, and some also anecdotal information that corresponded with how I've been viewing that very small window of Saturn Chiron, particularly in Pisces. Because Saturn and Chiron were in Aries for a while, but they weren't in opposition with Uranus Pluto. So that's a different alignment. By the way, the Friday night event was super cool out in Wimberley. Big shout out to Shannon and Russell at the Austin Astrological Association for putting that together. Ricky Williams was there. It was cool hanging out with Ricky. We talked a little about astrology, and it was cool. And you know, there was such a great vibe in the place, and it really, I don't know, it really feels like something's happening in Wimberley. Like, all these people are kind of like coming together. I mean, I think some of it is because, hey, you want to come here? You know, I'm here. So and so is here. There's some cool things happening. Yeah, sure, I'll show up. But it feels like there's something happening in Wimberley, Texas. Now, Russell, who is, I believe, Shannon's partner, I don't know if they're married or not, but he was talking about how there's a direct alignment with the Great Pyramid of Egypt at a particular angle with Wimberley. And the other thing with Wimberley is all the water that's beneath it. Like it is, Wimberley is Aquifer City, right? It is just very lush and verdant, and most of the aquifers are fairly, I think they're pretty untapped. So that in and of itself is also really interesting. You have this, amazing amount of, spring water, Texas spring water that is, beneath the, so there's a lot of wells out there. There's Jacob's Well, which is a place where people go swimming, and it's a really interesting environment. And the gathering of people all there to like create community and do all these things was pretty impressive. We'll see how it works out there. All right, let's do a quick little roll call. We got Mr. Sister Nino. He's here. The California Contrarian, Josie Jazzy Jump, Lynette Jardine, Misbehaving too. The New West, Saturn Aries looks pretty intimidating. I was going for the I don't know, post-New British metal look, right? I was going for like the diver down, sort of Dio, death metal, let's get people's attention kind of look, right? It was like, let's just go for it. Why not? We got stormy Oklahoma. Thunder brought the Saturn and Aries to the Nuggets playoffs hopes. That's right. So the Thunder and the Wolves. That's going to be a pretty good series, I think. I have to say. The Thunder and the Wolves. I'm going to go with, I hope the Thunder win, only because the Wolves beat my Warriors. So what would be the best series? Okay, if you want to know what I think the best series would be for all of you who might enjoy basketball, I believe the best series would be Minnesota versus New York. Because you would have the Karl Anthony Towns trade being played out. That would be the best series, in my estimation, because you'd have the trade narrative. Julius Randle, Towns, right? The second best series would be Oklahoma and New York. But I'm not sure New York gets out of the East because these plucky Pacers should not be underrated or discounted. They are very good. And you know that we're going to get nothing but Pacer Nick flashbacks from those epic series of the 90s. Reggie Miller, Spike Lee, Charles Oakley, John Starks. Like, there's just going to be nothing but flashbacks to those Pacer Nick series. I think the NBA probably wants the Knicks in the series because in the finals, because there's eyeballs. The Knicks are going to get eyeballs. Indiana, small market, although I'd like to see them in because they've never been. Right? They've never been to the finals. Yeah. Indiana, Minnesota. Does anybody really want to see that? Indiana, Oklahoma. I think the Knicks will probably come out of the East. The NBA just has too many eyeballs. They need the eyeballs. They need the ratings. The New York press would go nuts over the Knicks. The NBA would get huge coverage. I would expect the New York Knicks to get a lot of very favorable whistles in the upcoming series. I think Oklahoma and Minnesota is a bit of a coin flip. Oklahoma is deeper in terms of its rotation. Oklahoma will play 9-10 guys. Minnesota only goes about 7-8 deep. So if it's a long series, Oklahoma has the advantage because they have a deep, I think they're younger, a little bit younger, although Minnesota's got some young players too. I just think they have a deeper squad. Anyway, it'll be good. All right, enough basketball talk. Meow Meow's from Fort Worth. Of course she is. Elsbeth Heron checking in. Hi, Elsbeth. Diane Evans is here. Darlene, road trip 1981. And Shirley Loshava, thank you, Harry Doss 99. You know, who did I meet? What was the guy's name? Baba Hari Das. Baba Hari Das, the silent monk. I used to go to their community every now and then in Santa Cruz for they had like workshops and stuff there. I think it might have been called Mount Madonna or something like that. And they loved volleyball. And I always got a chuckle watching Baba Hari Das, this little Hindu guy, his little Hindu frock, do sets and spikes. Gave me a good chuckle. Zerlith the Immortal. See, look at that. He's a metal guy. Steve is a metal guy. Love it. See, I nailed it. I nailed that diver down metal shit. Loves the thumbnail. Uh-oh. Barbara came down with something. Uh-oh. Joan the lovely and talented one. She's with us. Joan made a great gluten-free chicken pesto pasta dish. Delicious for Friday night. We have Meow Meow and we have Meow Meow Kitty Poop. There's our guy, Mark S. What's going on, Mark? Big Dave Sullivan, Tom Jordan. Hit that like. You got to hit that like. Thanks, Tom. My man, Ryan is here. That's right. You can sign up for the locals. I'll be going to do some stuff on locals soon. Let's see. Who else we have here? Yes, Astro Weather. Don't forget it. Tuesday through Thursday. That is actually 8 a.m. CST. 9 a.m. your time. Let's see what else we have here. Now that's right. There you go. You got that right, Brian. Thank you. 15 minutes of flame. Benito Diaz in the house. Look at that. Oy vey. Kabuki Theater. Welcome, Afrikaners. I love that. I love that. That's great. Let's see. What else we have here? Ratchet Boo. Let's fucking go, party people. I like that. Yes, if you feel so inclined. You can buy yours truly a cup of coffee here. A metaphorical cup of coffee. Thanks, Ryan. John Bernasconi. Hello, John. Dead Wolf Resistance 13. How do you like that thumbnail, Dead Wolf? Stephen the Jupiterian. WC Ray, the price of paying attention has gotten too high. Just during the timeline is growing scary. I know. There's some truth to that. Juliana Campaniera. What's happening, Juliana? Steve, we're going to be talking about the Summer of Love, San Francisco tonight. Digging the glasses. Well, thanks. These are my emergency pair. Jeff Rosen. What's going on, Jeff? Good to see you. Tessa D77. D777. We live in Tessa. That is an understatement. The great Tessa Dick with us tonight. The great Tessa Dick. More bit clear in San Francisco. Enjoy that while you can. A lot of hot rain in Sydney. It doesn't get too hot. Evening from the central coast of California. We just watched an adaptation of a John Steinbeck story called The Wayward Bus. 1958. Starring Rick Jason of Combat fame, Jane Mansfield, and Joan frickin' Collins. And they may not have even been the sultriest woman in the movie. There was another actress who really pushed him on the sultry front. She wound up having a bit of an affair there with Mr. Rick Jason in The Hague. It was an entertaining movie, The Wayward Bus. Ming Lin. Hello, Ming Lin. Neil Smith, our guy up in Wisconsin. Rand. Rainy ice cream kind of night in Canada. Rainy ice cream kind of night. I like that. What if it rained ice cream? How many kids have ever fantasized about snowing ice cream? More than a few. Let's see, Palm Springs. Thanks, Shirley. Hi from Miriam. Friends call me Miri. Heard you were at Confluence. Sorry I didn't get to meet you. Yeah, I was there. It was great. I loved it. I want to go back out there just to go hang out and go to their restaurant there in Sovereignty Ranch. Janine is here. Yes, Tom, Palm Springs is very strange for sure. Oh, yeah. Then Shirley, thank you. Then the ship that hit the Brooklyn Bridge, right? It wasn't like a Mexican Navy vessel. Man, that was weird too. Wasn't quite as explosive, but did somebody die here on this? I think so. Let me check my audio. I got it here. I got mic volume, reduce mic background noise, echo cancellation. We should be good. Yeah, Palm Springs Fertility Clinic. Have you seen the bridge? It reminds me of Led Zeppelin, actually, referencing James Brown. Audio is good here. Thank you, Tom, for the terrorist has an audio clip. He has pictures of the blast. Wow. It was a sailing ship? Is that what it was, Tessa? That's weird. Thor, the door is here. What's going on? Blast much worse than depicted. Well, man, John, if you look at the description, like 250-yard blast field, that is not inconsequential. And then there's the James Comey thing that's blown up. That's right. Yep. Is this like an anti-Planned Parenthood? I think they're involved in helping same-sex couples, like any couple. But I think because I'm just speculating here, man. Right? It's like it's the location theory. With the LGBTQ club, the stones throw away from the clinic. Palm Springs having a super gay, large population. This might be the anti-abortion thing. Who brought that up? This is like an anti-Planned Parenthood. Steve, I think you're on. I think there's something to that. I think this is like an anti-Planned Parenthood thing. Yes. That's my sense. The suspect posted that he didn't want people born against their will. So that's a really interesting point. I was very interested for a while in people who had been born through artificial insemination. And the reason why is because I lived in Berkeley for a while, and there was this fertility clinic, and that's what they did. They hooked women at that time as women up with, it was a sperm bank basically. And I remember, like, I was hanging out with these two people, and we were sort of like postulating about what Y2K would be, and whether or not we needed to do anything to prepare. And this was like 1999. And one of them was this dude. And he had donated to that sperm bank like up to 60 times. I kid you not. So quite possibly this guy, let's say 50% of his 60 deposits wound up somewhere. This guy's got 30 kids running around that he doesn't really know about, right? And so I got into this thing and followed it. And a lot of these kids were actually resentful. They were resentful because it was kind of like, okay, it's not like you can't ask the kid, but when you have a marriage, theoretically, or somebody that you're with, and biologically, you create the child, you have a mother and a father. In many cases in that world, there's only a mother. There's just a mother. And so these kids are eventually told about this, and some of them have very visceral and not super positive reactions to it. So, I wonder if this was somebody who might have been through that experience, or maybe they've got some other angle, which is closer to what I'm talking about. But I'll tell you how freaky this gets, okay? This is how freaky it gets. When I lived in Albany, which is right next to Berkeley, my kid used to play with this other kid. And he was cool. The other kid was cool. Like, he played baseball, and, he was like a regular kid, right? Like my kid hanging out with this kid. They were cool. And then if we would go out and, like, I wouldn't call it a play date, but they're young, so kind of a supervised visit on the playground. He had this guy who was an interesting character. I liked him, and he made his money by buying lockers that people renege on, storage lockers. So he was ahead of the whole buying the storage lock. So I kept asking, what are you getting some of these things? And he told me like all the shit that he got when he bought these storage lockers. But he was there to hang out with this kid, like, and he was a cool guy. I think he might have been from Boston or New York or something like that originally. Now, this kid's mother was a lawyer. Okay. And I kind of liked her. She was cool. I had no beef with her. But then I found out that her son came through that clinic. Okay. I found that, and that's why that guy's there. He wasn't the father, but I guess maybe they had some kind of a relationship and it didn't work, but he really liked the kid. So I'd hang out with them. We'd go to the playground and they do, little kid shit. Okay, here's where it gets weird. So right next door to this woman's house, okay, was her sister. And her sister lived with another woman, right? So the sister and the other woman, California, guess what? They're married, right? They're married. Now, the sister has these kids, and the son of the woman who my kid played with, right? She told her son that the kids next door were his cousins, which is half true. Sort of. In actuality, the kids next door were his brother, half brother, and sister, and his cousin, because both women used the same sperm donor from that clinic. Okay. So that kid is going to grow up and he's going to think that the kid next door, I think it was just the boy. There were two girls. I don't think the two girls shared the same donor, but he and the boy next door did. So technically it was his cousin, but it was also like his half brother, right? And at some point, he's going to be told the truth. And it could go any number of ways. It could be cool, like it doesn't matter, he doesn't care, he loves him, they're buddy, and hey, we thought we were close, we're even closer before. We're even closer than before. Or it's like, you lying bitch. Why did you string me along like that? I thought we were just cousins the whole time, and we're actually half brothers. And oh, by the way, who the hell was my father? Who the hell is his father? Right? Like, it just sets this cascade event that unfolds. And I'm going to say something here that might be politically incorrect. And I promise this is all in the realm of astrology, right? We started to talk about this Uranus Taurus thing and this explosion at this clinic. And of course, Taurus does represent part of the reproductive and the fertility and the maternity act, right? But I'm going to say something that is going to be very politically incorrect. I believe that whole situation was set up for convenience. So hear me out. And again, I have no understanding about did it just evolve organically, or was there a plan? Right? It's like, okay, we're all not going to have husbands in nuclear families, but if we live next door to each other, we don't need them, right? Because we'll have each other as kind of a support group for each other's kids. So we don't really need them. And we can do this. And from the lesbian couple, like, I kind of understand it on their level, right? The other woman, it almost feels to me like a matter of convenience in some ways. That's what it felt like. It's like, this is going to be convenient for me. I get to have a kid. I get to be a lawyer. I don't have to have a domestic situation. I don't have to have a husband. I can pursue my career. I could have my sister and her husband, partner next to me, and we could have this unusual kind of nuclear family, and I can do what I want to do, right? I can do what I want to do. I don't have to be bound by any kind of ties that might bind me even more. And I remember this woman's astrological sign. She was an Aries. Like, she was an Aries. And it's like, oh, okay. I get it, right? You want to run your own show. You don't want any partner or any, you don't want any of that, but you do. And she was not LGBTQ. This woman, she was straight, right? But she didn't want any interference. She didn't want any man around. But she wanted the kid, and she wanted to be able to have it to be modular so she could invest in her career. That's what my take was with the whole thing. That's what my take was. So, but a lot of these kids resent the fact that they were just brought into the world. Some have actually met their fathers. Some have met each other. There are lots of documentaries and YouTube videos about stuff like this. And it's pretty fascinating and really bizarre. Really, really bizarre. All about self. Yeah. FC was a donor. He was a donor many times over. Aside from how the people born this way identify and feel the essence, it's got to be weird, right? I mean, it's just got to be a weird subsection of the population who've done this as children came through that gate and that portal. And I'm sure some of them have had positive experiences. But I have read and seen videos where a number of them are not very happy. They're not happy. Anyway, let's get into tonight's topic. Thank you for allowing me to just kind of go there, because that was an explosive event that happened over the weekend. So we're talking about Saturn. But before we do that, let me just do a quick little shout out to Chris here. And of course, True Hemp Science. Before we go too deep down that rabbit hole, True Hemp Science is the sponsor behind this show, besides yours truly, Robert Phoenix at robertphoenix.com. And it's some of the best CBD you'll find. All you got to do is go there, check out their products, all organically sourced. Chris is a complete alchemist. Spend $100 or more, type in 15MINS, and you will get more with your order. It's like Christmas morning when you open your order. It's the stocking that comes along with the rest of your order. And if you spend $150 or more, you'll always get free shipping. There's always a 30-day money-back guarantee. And you can make an appointment there to speak with someone if you need to, just to make sure you're getting the right stuff. All right. I'm not quite ready to go to Saturn Aries yet. I'm not quite ready. But I do want to talk about something astrological. It's definitely astrologically related. All right. It is definitely astrologically related. And then we'll get into the Saturn Aries stuff. Okay. So Donald Trump now has a war going on with Bruce Springsteen. I don't know if you've seen this, but Bruce Springsteen came out and, tongue lashed Donald Trump. He tongue lashed him about immigration and pulling people out of their homes. Bruce Springsteen saw himself as the descendant of Bob Dylan, who is the descendant of Woody Guthrie, and Bruce Springsteen did his Nebraska record, which is his best Woody Guthrie kind of, sparse Ballad of Tom Joad kind of, everyman, record, right? But he's been super, super fucking critical. And now Trump is firing back. And now Bruce Springsteen's not backing down. He's not backing down. And I won't back down to that. Tom Petty's not around. Tom Petty started to get into some interesting stuff. Like his last record was all about fucking surveillance. Right? Tom Petty saw where things were going. And he wasn't real happy about it. But the other guy here that we're going to bring into the conversation is Neil Young. Okay? Neil Young. So what I want to do is I want to give you a visual. And I'm going to bring this to astrology. Just hang in there. Okay? We're going to get into astrology around this. But here is Neil Young and Bruce Springsteen. Astrologically, of course, you're probably aware of the fact that Neil Young is a Scorpio. Bruce Springsteen is born on September 23rd, which puts him on the autumnal equinox. So he shares that day with none other than John Coltrane. It's a shame that John Coltrane has to share that day with Bruce Springsteen. Okay. I used to like Bruce Springsteen up until The River. I still think, hands down, Darkness on the Edge of Town is one of the great underrated rock records. Love it. And I even like some of like Born to Run, Wild Innocent, the E Street Shuffle, Greetings from Asbury Park. I don't really have a problem with that era of Bruce Springsteen. Back in the day, he was the live act to see before he got all political and shit. Right? It wasn't just Bruce Springsteen, it was the band and everything, like the staging, the lights, Clarence Clemens on saxophone. The band was kick ass. big sound. They had a keyboard player and they had a piano player. They had both. They had 2 guitar players. They had a bass player. They had a drummer. And they had the big man, Clarence Clemens, on saxophone. And it was a great fucking show. And at some point, Bruce Springsteen became like sour milk. Neil Young was always sour. Okay, he was always sour. But together, these guys have become insufferable. They have become insufferable assholes. And I have this theory about this, and it's astrological. And some of their generation kind of share it, okay? Now, to be fair, I went through a number of other assholes from other generations, like Eddie Vedder. I mean, Eddie Vedder's kind of an asshole in my book. Eddie Vedder was born in 1965, I believe. So he's right there at the edge of the end of the baby boom and Gen X, right? Billy Joe Armstrong from Green Day, he's an asshole. He's Gen X. So Gen X, you've got your assholes. Pluto and Leo. These guys are Pluto and Leo. And I'm like, okay. I hate to throw Joni Mitchell in there, but she's kind of in there. You know, and I love Joni Mitchell. She's kind of in there. I hate to say that. And I'm sure if I spent any reasonable amount of time, Paul McCartney, right, I could go down the list of some of these guys. Now, I actually like Roger Waters, but some people will say, well, he is an asshole. But he's an asshole that I kind of find interesting. These assholes I don't find very interesting. And I hope I don't offend Neil Young and Bruce Springsteen lovers. They have some good music. I'd say Springsteen more than Neil Young, up to a point. But it's this Pluto and Leo thing. Okay? It's this Pluto and Leo thing. And part of it has to do with this idea that, and again, I don't mean to piss off any Pluto and Leo people, so please just bear with me here. It's not you. It's them, not you. But it's this Pluto and Leo thing where it's like our opinions matter more than yours. They matter more than yours. And it's because of this Leo hierarchical assignment value or value assignment. Right? It's just like, yeah, I get it, right? You're Pluto and Leo, kings of rock and roll, right? You guys rode the tsunami of the golden age, and and you're still in a weird way hanging on by your fingernails to stay on the top of the pyramid. Pluto and Leo. But what's opposite Leo? It's Aquarius. And so what these guys do is they tap into this like faux Aquarian rage. Like it's got to be all about equality, and it's got to be all about this. It's got to be all about, whatever Aquarian related issue that they wouldn't even say would be Aquarian, but it is. Right, like now, Bruce Springsteen has got to be the spokesperson for everybody who is a migrant. Neil Young had to be the spokesperson for science because all the people that didn't want to take the jab, they were just obnoxious assholes, including that Joe Rogan, because only people like us have the ability to, pronounce the truth from on high. Because somewhere back in the day, a bunch of critics anointed them. Whether it's Bob Dylan, Neil Young, Bruce Springsteen, there was a lot of anointing going on. And you don't think that doesn't go to their heads? Of course it does. There was a time when Neil Young used to have these concerts called the Bridge Concerts. And they were very cool. There was a school, I believe, somewhere in like Woodside or where Neil Young lived. Neil Young lived above Woodside, but and the proceeds would go to that school and I guess some other schools that dealt specifically with autistic children, because Neil had a couple of autistic kids. And so the bridge concerts were held at the Shoreline Amphitheater, and they were almost always acoustic. And the proceeds would go, we think, to those schools. So that's really humanitarian. That's a very kind of Aquarian thing for Neil to do. And a lot of people would show up and, oh, look, surprise guest. It's David Bowie. And of course, David Bowie did show up one time. And it was always like, well, who's going to show? Well, I believe that ended at some point when Neil Young left his wife for Daryl Hannah. And maybe those schools got enough money. I don't know, right? But once Neil didn't have that as part of his social credit, he began to speak out on a bunch of other things. And it feels to me like it's this Aquarian pocket that's in opposition to Pluto and Leo. So in order to justify, like they won't tell you this though. This is just my take. In order to justify their staying at the top of like the social, cultural, musical rock pyramid, they have to do this like virtue signaling in a lot of ways, which is very Aquarian. And it's for whatever group. Like I know for Neil Young, he was really pissed off because this Joe Rogan guy who didn't know anything about science, was making all this money on Spotify, and he was going to pull his content from Spotify unless Spotify did something to Joe. Joe Rogan makes way more fucking money for Spotify than Neil Young does or will ever make. Okay, so Neil, you aren't that important. But in his mind, right, it's like this weird virtue signal. And everybody who was kind of in that camp, Joni Mitchell was in that camp too. I couldn't believe it. Like Joni Mitchell has Morgellons. Scorpio, like Neil Young, you're like, I don't want to offend the Canadians, but come on, right? It's this thing, right? And Bruce Springsteen personifies it even more in some ways than Neil Young. Neil Young, who, by the way, is a big proponent of nuclear power, which again is weird. And his, while the good left was doing no nukes, Neil was doing a record called Reactor to promote nuclear energy. So Neil's got a bit of the contrarian in him, but that fucking died somewhere along the way. And he became just another, kind of liberal tool mouthpiece that was, one of Fauci's, like, those little wind-up mechanical dolls, like little wind-up mechanical monkeys. He became like one of Fauci's little wind-up mechanical monkeys out there around the vax, right? That's what he did. He just was completely bullying and berating other people who didn't believe in the thing that he believed in, which is weird because in the 60s, you would think that almost everybody, and a lot of the 60s guys, right, a lot of the 60s people just fell right in line with the old jabberoo. We all watched them. We're like, remember these fuckers? They were the ones that were, by the way, we're going to return to the 60s. They were the ones that were all about back to the land and organic. And all of a sudden, they're flying the science banner. But it's this Aquarian thing, right? It's this Aquarian negative space that these people that are still clinging, Pluto and Leo, to the top of the fucking pyramid, that they feel like they have to do. Now, in Springsteen's defense, he's a Libra. He's a 0-degree Libra. And so he's hung up on fairness and balance. And, I've got to speak up for the little guy. Well, why don't you speak out for the South African farmers, Bruce? If you feel so fair and balanced, you could say all these migrants came from all these other countries and they represented X amount of the population. And we have 54 people coming from South Africa, and they represent an extremely small number of their population. Well, since I'm a super Libra, well, why don't we just balance it out and bring more South Africans into this country? Do you think he would do that? No, he wouldn't. You know why? Because he is clinging. He is clinging to the top of the rock and roll pyramid by his fucking fingernails. And he will use everything at his disposal in order to somehow remain politically and socially relevant. And what he is failing miserably at is understanding that the political and social spectra has changed. Right? This is why he's doing, I'm telling you, right? It's why he's doing it. And again, it's very Aquarian. And, back in the day when these guys, Summer of Love in the 60s, the Aquarian thing, the Aquarian back end of Pluto and Leo, they were able to do it. They were able to handle it, right? Woodstock. Are you kidding me? How much more Aquarian does it get than Woodstock, right? Like there was a stage, right? There was we'll call it the divine flame or the twin flame for their Pluto and Leo, right? It was this kind of new world that they were trying to pioneer. And that was perfect. It was a perfect match, right? It was a perfect, Pluto and Leo was the flame, and then Aquarius, right, was the gas. That's what it was. It was like the natural gas. Together, you would have, an explosion of culture and talent and all the things went along with it. And for a while, it kind of worked. But then it didn't, right? Then it doesn't work. And then the 70s sit in, and these people go through drug addictions and divorces, and styles change. That's a whole different discussion. But they're still trying to hang on. And again, I've talked about this before, and this is not a swipe at anybody, Pluto and Leo, watching the show, but I've talked about it before. And Leo represents childhood. It's childhood. It is theoretically, if you don't grow up in an abusive or violent home, and even then you can kind of step out and have some, kind of golden memories. But childhood is that kind of golden period of time. It's a goal, and your future's ahead of you. And you have so much potential. Like that's the way it was back in the day. And these guys grew up in the fucking 50s, right? In the 50s, where it was a super highway of potentiality. Are you kidding me? A freaking super. Today, you're growing up, that super highway is like, a two-lane interstate of potential for a lot of people. I'm sorry, it's just the way it is. And pretty soon it'll be a washboard road. I think we're going to have like jet cars at some point, supplant everything. But that's how they were raised, right? And so a lot of people who were born, and I get into some debate around this. We're talking about Pluto and Leo and generational astrology here. So for me, Pluto and Leo, I know for a fact that Pluto and Leo shows up for the first time in 1939. Okay. It's too early for the baby boomers to show up. They're not showing up yet. 1942. Now we've got Pluto and Leo. The boys are still at war in 1942. They're still at war. Pluto is in Leo in 1942, and there's no retrograding back into Cancer, like that's done, right? That's done. So in my estimation, sort of the first wave of the boomers show up around 1942. 1945, the men are coming home from war. What do they want to do? They want to make babies. Hello, that is the baby boom. Pluto and Leo, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, pumping them out. Right? So if you look at, say, 1945, you're born in 1945, 46, Donald Trump was born in 1947. You're growing up in the 1950s, right? Like the 1950s are your era. You are 10 years old in the 1950s. You know, you're watching a very different kind of TV. Very, very different kind of TV. It's a different world. It's post-war America. It's Dwight Eisenhower. The suburbs are starting to expand. America is starting to move into peak production phase and cycle. You could have a regular job, whatever it was, right? Like you could work at a fucking soda fountain. Yeah, they had soda fountains in the 50s. And guess what? There's a pretty good chance not only could you afford an apartment, but you might not be able to afford a house, especially if you come home from the war and you got the GI Bill. So it's a very different world, right? They're growing up in the even if you're born in like 1952, you're growing up in the 1950s. Okay, that is your area of like cultural experience, and it's different than people who were born like post 1958. So if you're born like 58 through 64, 60, you, believe it or not, you're still considered a boomer or a late boomer. I tell you right now, people born 1958 to 1965 have very little in common with the generation, the subgeneration that preceded them. Those are real Pluto and fucking Leo boomer people. Pluto and Virgo does not really fit the mold. Like we're growing up in the 70s. You know, I am 10 in 1970. The 70s are my 50s. I am not partaking in the 1960s, although I was there and I lived within a stone's throw of San Francisco. So I felt it, but you know, I wasn't growing up in the, like if you were 15, 16, 17, or 1950, by the time where Summer of Love comes around, you're 19, you're 17 years old, you're hitchhiking your ass to San Francisco. That's what you're doing. And am I hitchhiking my ass to San Francisco? No, I'm not. I'm going there with my parents and my grandparents. And I think this is a really important thing to understand. Like when you grow up, when you reach, and I believe 10 is really the critical year, right? 10 is a critical year. Wherever you are during that period or that decade, that is when your social imprinting really takes place. So these guys grew up in the 50s. It's not perfect, but I got to tell you, like, it's pretty damn good. Like they've got all this possibility ahead of them. And, you know, they're all up into rock and roll and, you know, they're gonna, you know, make their money and do their thing. And, you know, they're going to be stars, right? Which is what they do. That's what happens. But the Aquarian thing now, the Aquarian thing, which had a fit. I mean, even with Springsteen's band, because Springsteen kind of hits a little like Springsteen's first records. I remember listening to Born to Run in high school. I think it might have been about 14. So I believe Greetings from Asbury Park and Wild Innocent E Street Shuffle come out, 71, 72 maybe. So Springsteen's not really like part of the Woodstock thing. But if you look at his band, it's a very Aquarian kind of band. The first keyboard player he had was this guy named David Sanchez. And of course, he had Clarence Clemens. So he had an interracial band, and it's, very Aquarian in some ways. And he's coming out of New Jersey, which is very different than California and the Laurel Canyon. Springsteen's just a different sort of genre altogether. But he still is part of this being born into the sort of the heart of the baby boom, and this Pluto and Leo, and wanting to say young forever. Forever young, Neil Young, right? I mean, think about that. And so they hang on precipitously. They try to stay relevant. And they go into this political world. And look, Bruce has been there for a long time. I mean, at least I'll give him some credit for being somewhat consistent, because he was very involved in the Amnesty International concerts. I saw him at one. So it's not like he just became a cause celeb with his political beliefs. But at this point in time, it's a lot different, because back then he was looking at these governments who had political prisoners, right? By the way, one time I went through the list of political prisoners that were on the Amnesty International list. And guess what a lot of those political prisoners were? They were communist agitators. Does that surprise you? Does that fucking surprise you? It's like, well, we're here to stand up against oppression. Okay, that's fine. Well, how do you deal with that oppression? We're going to overthrow the government. We're going to be communist. Oh, okay. Right. So how do these so-called dictators or people running the country, we know how they fucking feel about that. They're like, fuck you. You got two choices. I'll either kill you, you're going to go to jail for a while, because we don't want your system here. Yeah, we may not be the capitalist Valhalla, but we don't want that. Right? So at least Springsteen was consistent. Neil Young, on the other hand, like strange. One day he wants nuclear reactors. The next day he wants everybody to take shots for next year. But I feel like I just wanted to talk about this, because it gets, and as Pluto, and remember this now, these guys at a certain point are going to start to feel the effects of Pluto and Aquarius, slowly, inexorably move into opposition with their Pluto. Like that is going to come to them. And as that begins to move closer and closer and closer, you're going to see perhaps even more dramatic attempts on their part to either stay alive or stay relevant. And what they're missing ultimately, and I'm going to go with both of them, is that they are not understanding where the political climate is going. And that's part of what we're going to do tonight when we tackle this Saturn in Aries subject, which I am going to dive headfirst into right now. Okay. Let's talk about Saturn in Aries just on its own. Saturn in Aries is in its fall. Okay. So in astrology, we have dignity, we have exaltation, we have fall, and we have detriment. All right. When something is in its dignity, like Jupiter in Sagittarius or Saturn in Capricorn, the opposite sign, say Jupiter in Gemini, where we are right now, is in its fall. Saturn in Cancer would be in its fall. All right. When something is exalted, right, like Saturn in Libra is exalted. Saturn, I'm sorry. When it is in dignity, the opposite is detriment. I always get these two confused. I have to rework for me. When something is in dignity, the opposite is detriment. And when something is exalted, the other is in fall. Saturn in Libra is exalted. Saturn in Aries is in its fall. Let me just, because I know, hold on a second. Hold on. I'm dyslexic. This is the one area in astrology that I can fucking be dyslexic in. And I apologize for that. So Saturn in Aries, I know it's in its fall. We know that, right? Saturn in Libra is exalted. It's exalted, right? We know it's exalted. Yes. So when something is exalted, the other planets or the other sign that it's in is in its fall. When something is in dignity and the other planet, right? I got hung up with Libra, and I apologize. The other planet is in its detriment, okay? So Jupiter in Gemini is in its detriment. Jupiter in Sagittarius, dignity. Saturn in Libra, exalted. Saturn in Aries, fall. Okay, so we've got that covered. I go a little dyslexic. We got that. Okay. So we know that Saturn in Aries is in its fall. It is in the opposite position of the most exalted place for Saturn, which is Libra. And Saturn in Libra is exalted because it represents the structural application of fairness and equality and the bond of word and deed in contract. That is why Saturn is exalted in Libra. Saturn rules judges. Saturn rules judges. Libra rules the legal system. Sagittarius writes the laws. Libra rules the legal system, right? Another reason why Saturn is exalted in Libra, because it brings both of those branches together, right? Both of them together. So Saturn in Aries is not in the best place. Let's put it that way. If you want to break it down in terms of energy, Aries is all about the expression of the will, right? It is all about now. Aries is just about now. Now. Not tomorrow, not yesterday, now. Right? Let's keep going. Let's keep moving. Let's keep pushing, moving forward, right? Manifest destiny, pioneers crossing, the great continent, meeting the savage Indians along the way. A lot of people in the 50s got that story, right? I mean, that's Aries. That is Aries. Unimpeded, well, Aries likes that. Aries doesn't like to be impeded. Saturn is the great imposition, right? It's like, whoa. We're not moving forward here. Like Saturn is the roadblock in Aries. We're not moving forward here, right? If you're going to move forward, you're only going to move forward when I tell you you're moving forward. So there's hierarchy. Saturn represents hierarchy. So in Aries, like Saturn Aries is that's the fucking military. And some of you have been in the military, you know what I'm talking about. Like, soldier, did I say you could move? I mean, because normally, just for your own volition, hey, I want to go over here and move. Did I say you can move, soldier? No, sir. You're not going to be able to move till I tell you to move. Yes, sir. That's Saturn in Aries in a fucking nutshell. Somebody tells you what you can do and not do. Literally. right? Literally, that's what it is. And a lot of Gen X was born, early Gen X, Saturn and Aries. And that's interesting. Some of that will show up, ultimately with divorces. With Pluto and Libra, Saturn and Aries will play a pretty significant role in all of that. Aries is the individual. It represents individual drive. Libra is the other. It's the self and the other. Aries is just the self. When I work with a client and I get into, let's say, a Saturn-Mars conjunction in the chart. So there's a Saturn transit and it's hitting natal Mars. It's going to be there for a while. Like, we know that it's going to be there for a while, right? It might move ahead a few degrees, retrograde, move back, but, in that transit, you better be prepared to deal with the effects of Saturn conjuncting Mars, which is another iteration of Saturn and Aries, because Mars is the ruling planet, right? When that happens, one of the things that I talk about to the person who I'm having that discussion with is that you better be doing something that you are committed to and you don't mind putting in a lot of hard effort or labor or work to do that, right? Because that's what happens with Saturn conjuncting Mars. It's like, shit, I have all this pressure to get all this done. And it's usually, if it's in a corporate setting, it's a bitch, right? There's tons of pressure. It's like whoever's above you and whoever's above them, they're all literally like just cascading down on your Mars. But it could be brutal. It could be exhausting, right? Now, if you are committed to doing something, let's say you have a creative project. Let's say you're writing a book. Saturn conjunct your Mars might be very worthwhile because you wouldn't mind like all of the hours involved and all the work that it's going to take in order to do that, right? Saturn is heavy gravity. I liken it at times also to, accelerating with the brakes on, because Saturn is all about no, right? And what does Mars want to do? Mars is all about let's move forward. So the Saturn-Mars conjunction can be rather difficult in a transit, but if you can work with it, right, you can learn, you can endure and learn a lot. I'll give you one other example of what's possible with a Saturn-Mars conjunction. If you can, this would not be like your own project. Like, you didn't just start your own business. You got Saturn conjunct Mars, and all you're going to do is work your ass off to start this business and keep it going, right? Or it's not some kind of project where it's a book or whatever, and you're just going to Saturn Mars this thing, or building a house, whatever that is. Let's say you are in a corporate environment and you do have to deal with that Saturn Mars, right? Maybe somebody in that equation is going to teach you something, and you may not like it in the moment. In fact, you may fucking hate it. You may come home at night and you may throw things against the wall. But there's a very good chance that you will wind up on the other side of this, getting something out of that, right? Like, it's one of the hardest teachers in astrology with Saturn. Very difficult. But if you can kind of undergo the discipline that goes along with it, you will learn something. You will get something out of it. And at the end of that experience, right, you will understand the nature of endurance and discipline. And paradoxically, whoever is forcing the pressure on you with a Saturn-Mars opposition, there's a very good chance you'll thank them in the long run because of what you had to go through and learn. Okay. Now, Saturn also represents the father. So in the workplace, the father is the quote unquote boss, a name I hate, but it's the quote unquote boss or the director or the super, whoever that person is. They represent the father in the workforce. That said, Saturn is the father outside of the workforce. So you're also going through a Saturn-Mars conjunction. You're dealing with overarching paternal systems, i.e. the father, right? That's a part of it as well. That's just in a Saturn-Mars conjunction. Transit-wise, if you got Saturn-Mars in your chart, like you are trying really in this lifetime to understand sort of where your will begins and where the will, whether it's direct or indirect from your father, ends, right? And you have to somehow figure this out on your own. And it's not always very easy, right? It's not an easy conjunction to have. But if you do have it, and if you have it within a 3 degrees and out, it can be a very formidable conjunction. It's a power that you as an individual can channel once you understand it. And it can bring you tremendous drive, tremendous authority. And if you're willing to roll up your sleeves, although like Mars and Capricorn does, you can gain a lot of respect from people because you're not just telling them what to do. They understand that you're not above doing the hard work. So Saturn and Mars have this really interesting, not always comfortable relationship. So now we talk about Saturn and Aries, which is this 3-year cycle we're going to enter into very quickly, right? It is going to happen and it's going to be upon us by the end of the freaking month. Or, if you want to drill down, I'll give you the date. And it's just the beginning, right? Because it does retrograde. It retrogrades back into Pisces, and it goes direct after the retrograde in December at 25 Pisces. But Saturn goes into Aries this month, a scant 12 days from now, on the 26th. It is the first ingress of Saturn. And guess what? It's conjuncting Neptune at 1 degree. 1 degree. You go back to that Civil War period we talked about before, right? Neptune 0 Aries. There was no Saturn there at that time, right? There was absolutely no Saturn. Well, there was, but it wasn't in Aries. Okay, so let's go ahead just a tad here. Just a tad. We're going to get into 2026 because that is the next period where, you know what the fuck? Why don't you do this anymore? Hold on. AstroDienst used to do this thing where you could just change the year by changing the date in the string in the URL, but they don't let you do it anymore. So now you got to go in, you got to get the other date. Okay. So Saturn goes back into Aries again. Now, this is interesting. It goes back into Aries again on Valentine's Day of 2026. And at that point, it conjuncts Neptune much more exactly, right? And if we play this out just a tad, right, just a tad, we get Neptune in Aries at 44 degrees, 44 degrees, 44 minutes. Okay, so I'll show you right here so you guys can see what I'm looking at. Right here. Okay. Right there. All right. So did I get that? Am I seeing it? Hold on. Hold on. Right there. Okay, here we go. All right, so this is what I'm talking about. Okay, so in February, we're going to scroll down here. You can see, right, Saturn has gone retrograde, goes back into Pisces, comes back into Aries on the right there, one day after Valentine's Day, the 15th. So that's on a Saturday. Okay, then we can see Neptune over here. Saturn is at 0 degrees 7 minutes. Neptune is over here at 0 degrees 34 minutes. But Saturn moves faster. So by the time we get to right here on the 19th, right? So between the 19th and the 21st of February, which is the ingress of the sun into Pisces, Saturn and Neptune are exactly conjunct at 0 degrees. That won't be 0.00. It'll be 0.40 roughly, right? So there's our Neptune right there. And here's, it's like there's Saturn right there. Right there. Right on the 20th. That is when we have the closest exact conjunction between these two at 0. In 2025, which we were looking at previously on Sunday Night AstroLive, we looked at the year 2025. So this is what we're looking at here, right? Neptune's already in Aries, right there. Neptune. April, May. But you see, Aries is at 1 and Saturn's at 0. Yeah, Saturn gets close, catches up, right? 0, 1, 1, 2, but they're not together at 0. That's not till next year. That's an interesting conjunction, right? At the 0 point. Because we also go through a retrograde with Neptune as well. And Neptune will go back and sneak back into Pisces a little bit. It's going to hide out in Pisces for a little bit. Saturn will retrograde and hide out in Pisces a little bit. And then we get the real shabooey right next year. But we got to talk about it now because it's coming. We will have a preview. It's like a sneak preview. So what we see with Saturn-Neptune conjunction coming shortly to a theater near you in May, that's going to be a preview of what's coming, right? The events that take place, pay attention to those events. The events that take place during that brief period of time are giving us a bit of a window onto when this thing really takes off and goes full-blown Saturn-Neptune conjunction. Okay, so Aries is about war. It's war. It's violence. It's war. It's clearly martial. Aries is the god of war. It's that simple. The god of war. If you go back and which we're going to do, there are the last 2 Saturn and Aries cycles are fucking war heavy, right? They're war heavy. The last Saturn and Aries cycle, which begins in 1996 and ends in 1999, a 3-year period we shall look at in great detail. The period before that does take us back to the 1960s, 1967, right? That's when Saturn goes into Aries. But the thing that differentiates 1967 from 1996 is the fact that in 1967, which was the summer of love, guess where Jupiter was? Jupiter was in Leo. Doesn't that make sense? Like, if you're going to have a fucking summer of love, you know, why not Jupiter and Leo? Of course. You know, and who's there to like take full advantage of the summer of love? It's all those beautiful Pluto and Leo boomer artists. That is their fucking time, right? That Jupiter is conjuncting their suns as it goes through the ingress through Leo. Like, that is when they all kind of, you know, blow up, right? You know, whatchamacallit, let's see, part of the birds, like, where was Graham Nash? What group? The Young Bloods, right? The Young Bloods. Come on, people now, smile on your brother, right? So you have the Young Bloods eventually morphing into, guess who? Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, right? It's all kind of blossoming, like they're all blossoming then. Summer of love. But 1968, oh, Jupiter goes into Virgo, and man, that summer of love, the sheen, right? The sheen that for a brief period of time, sort of the golden age, the dawning of Aquarius in 1967, that all goes away. In 1968, Saturn in Aries becomes one of the bloodiest years in recent memory, right? Like in 1968, you've got the riots in Paris, you got the riots in America, the Democratic National Convention, and guess what else you got? You got Vietnam heating up, right? It is, you know, Nixon's president, and he's like, we're not going to lose that fucking war. So now, eventually, that 3-year period from 67 to 70, you have this heightened, and I mean heightened, acceleration of the Vietnam War, right? It's huge. The Weather Underground pops up. They start blowing shit up, right? That's all Saturn and Aries territory. We're going to look at that, right? It is violent, really, really violent. And you have a layer of authority that wants to superimpose itself over this violence. And in many cases, it's probably warranted, right? So I'm just giving you a bit of a historical background. When we get to 1996, we're going to go through 1996 and 7 8. I'm going to show you through the timeline just how violent this last Saturn through Aries transit was. And in fact, you have this thing that starts in roughly 92 to 95, right? That's like this, you know, the war with, you know, Bosnia and the Croats. But then in fucking 96, the war in Kosovo starts. So you have all these balkanized states that sort of break out and have these old blood feuds that were kind of going on before the communists, you know, said we're all one unhappy family. And once that's gone, like these blood feuds start to come out. And some of this, I believe, also has some accelerant from the West, right? Some accelerant from the West, because this is a very chaotic situation that starts to evolve in 1992 and stretches into like the late 90s. And what's a good old saying? Ordo ab chao, out of chaos, order, right? Because now you've got all these places with all these resources that are now going to be available to not just the West, but these oligarchs from Russia. And it's much easier to get in and put your claims on a gas field or a uranium field or anything else when there is chaos. When there's order, you can't do it, right? You just can't do it because there is a semblance of how things are done. Well, you're going to get this, and you're going to get this, you're going to get this percentage. No, you want people kind of, fighting each other. You want them at each other's throat because you can go in and kind of backdoor shit. And when something ends, you can kind of move right in and, hey, look at what we have here. We got ourselves a nice little uranium mine. Right? So that's just part of it. I'm going to show you, starting in 1996, right, just how intensely violent, it's just going to be 97, just how intensely violent this period is. 97, 98, 99. All right. We're going to go down memory lane here. And I'm showing you this just to establish, a particular order, because we can learn a lot from the past. These are cycles. Now, how it looks, well, quite different than how it looked. But sometimes these areas that were visited by violence and war in the past can also be reignited with an ingress or a transit. Okay, so Saturn goes into Aries literally in the month of Aries in 1996. Happens on April 8th, 4/8/96. We get our first taste of Saturn in Aries, right? And guess what? That's where it stays. That is where it stays until, well, it just misses going back into Pisces. Just misses. And it goes back into Aries at 0:37 in December. So it's like we get to start it up all over again. All right, so we're going to go back to 1996, 1997. And we're going to look at what was happening then, just to give you an idea of the intensity of war and violence. You don't really understand it. It's all happened in the past, right? Theoretically. And until we, can kind of dredge it back. Oh, look at this. Look at this. Okay. So we're going to start with April. Let's go with April right here. By the way, a lot of earthquakes in Saturn and Aries. You'll see that as well. And I think we're going to see more of that. Okay, so let's start right here. Okay? All right. So the First Liberian Civil War. Fighting breaks out in Monrovia, Liberia, between various rebel factions struggling for power in the country's interrupted civil war. Several foreign nationals leave the nation. Oh, same day, Turkish authorities begin Operation Hawk, a military offensive against the rebels from Kurdistan Workers' Party. Okay. April 11th, the Israeli government launches Operation Grapes of Wrath, consisting on massive attacks on Lebanon in retaliation for terrorist attacks and sparking off a violent series. We're just getting into Saturn and Aries right here. April 18th, Qana massacre. Over 100 Lebanese civilians killed after Israel shells the United Nations compound in Qana. Some things never change. All right. What else do we have here? We got the Port Arthur massacre. Martin Bryant kills 35 people at the Port Arthur tourist site. Isn't that when they start to make guns illegal? Wasn't this guy kind of like, I think this is when they started to, where's that Pine Gap? Anyway, by Peru, It's in Pakistan. A bomb explodes, killing more. You're going to see this. You're going to see over the course of the next 3 years violence, violence, violence. South Africa's National Party pulls out of the coalition government formed 2 years earlier, and the African National Congress assumes full political control. How about that? Right at the beginning of Saturn and Aries, the ANC takes right on over, and here we go. Here we go, right? Almost 30 years later, 29, Saturn cycle. What are we dealing with now? We're dealing with the results of the African National Congress, assuming full political control. We're seeing migration out of South Africa, right? How about that? And guess what? It doesn't really have the face of what migration has looked like recently. A lot of plane crashes too during Saturn and Aries. All right. A lot of Pakistani stuff too. Let's see. The first Chechnya war. Russian President Boris Yeltsin meets with Chechnyan rebels for the first time, negotiates a ceasefire. So you got a Chechnyan war going on. You got your Albanian election. Oh, look at this. Look at this. May 30th. The Likud party, led by Benjamin Netanyahu, wins a narrow victory in the Israeli general election. This is the first time Netanyahu gets elected. He has been there for an entire, mostly in and out, an entire fucking Saturn cycle. Okay? An entire Saturn cycle. He got in on the wheels of Saturn and Aries. I think he's going out on the wheels of Saturn and Aries. I think Netanyahu is going to wind up being ousted. That is my take, right? A lot of people say, well, Trump is just doing this because he wants to appease the patriots, or he's really doing all this for Israel in disguise. And I don't agree with that wholeheartedly. Do I agree with some of that? Yeah, sure. I do. But not all of it, because Trump is a fucking Sun Uranus Gemini. You don't know where he's going, right? When you think you know where he's going, you don't. And does he have a side of himself that is always self-interested? You bet your ass he does. Every single president that sat in that fucking seat, maybe with the exception of Jimmy Carter, maybe, they've all been insanely self-interested. So this is interesting. Netanyahu. So I talked about this the other day on 15 Minutes. I believe what Trump is attempting to do is he is attempting to outflank Benjamin Netanyahu in his own country and to become more popular than Netanyahu. And that ultimately the pressure will be on Netanyahu to either resign, step down, as we come to the end of a freaking Saturn cycle. The same cycle that gave the world Benjamin Netanyahu. In 1996, on May 30, that cycle thankfully comes to a close and a new one begins. And I don't think Netanyahu is a part of Saturn's next cycle or story. Okay? Iraq, disarmament crisis. Oh, yeah, we had Saddam Hussein back then. And they got a crisis there. We got Ariane 5, explodes 40 seconds into its maiden flight in French Guinea. That cost European governments $7.5 billion over 11 years. Think about that. That is like, that is like some severe premature ejaculation. Here you are. Here you go. It's your big moment, right? This is your big moment. You get Jane Mansfield before she took a bunch of bodies. Here you are. You're just walking right up to Jane Mansfield. And before you can even, penetrate, before you even penetrate the dome, right? You're done. Shot your payload. $7,500,000,000 gone in 40 seconds. That might be a great way to actually launder a bunch of money, build a shitty rocket that's not worth $7,500,000,000, and you pocket the rest. I wonder where that went. Okay, we got more here. A peace convoy of Chechen separatist leaders, international diplomats, is targeted by a series of remotely controlled landmines. 8 people are killed. IRA bombing. The troubles, man. The troubles were happening. I'm telling you, you don't remember it, but the late 90s were fucking violent the world over. The world over. And we're just getting started here. Okay. Hey, Scott Ritter, remember him? Iraq disarmament crisis. UN Inspector Scott Ritter attempts to conduct surprise inspections on a Republican Guard facility at the airport, but was blocked by Iraqi officials. How about that? Dolly the sheep, the first mammal to be successfully cloned from an adult cell, is born at the Roslin Institute in Midlothian, Scotland. Roslin, also the chapel. Now, what you're going to see here is you're going to see a bunch of countries making laws against cloning during this time, which is pretty odd. But I believe it's also started by this whole Dolly thing. Right? Okay. Here's one. TWA Flight 800, Boeing 747. That's a major explosion. That happens then. Saturn, Aries. By the way, there was a bomb on that. There was a bomb on that plane, and they got killed. Summer Olympics in Atlanta. Hey, speaking of bombs, speaking of explosive, that starts. Oh, there we go. July 27th, Centennial Park bombing, which we've talked about. And part of the ongoing attempts to create this idea that America was filled with domestic terrorists to pass all these anti-terror laws. That's all. See, that's Saturn and Aries. That is what I'm talking about, right? It is the authoritarian reach. The authoritarian reach, Saturn. And Aries, like, there's the beginning of the talk of like gun control during the Clinton administration. That's Saturn and Aries stuff, right? All the anti-terror, Saturn and Aries. Saturn, it's like, okay, we are going to forcibly restrict like these individual, like gun rights, individual gun rights. We are going to enforce these anti-terror laws because there's been a run-up of these events, which was supposed to coincide with a much worse bombing in Atlanta. And then, we're paving the way here for martial fucking law. Right? There you go. And we're only in August. Let's see what else we have here. So de Klerk apologizes for apartheid. How'd that work out? How'd that fucking work out? 35 years later, apparently apologies aren't enough. Now we can't even let people that never even lived during that period into this country because they've been tainted, historically and socially tainted. Here we go. Osama bin Laden, declaration of jihad on the Americans, occupying the country of two sacred places. But number two, foreshadowing the Twin Towers. Now, of course, if you think Osama bin Laden masterminded all that, it's time to have a cup of reality. Let's see. Who else do we have here? Oh, David Dellinger. Bradford Lighty and 9 others are arrested by Federal Protective Service while protesting in a demonstration at the Plazinski Federal Building in downtown Chicago during this year's Democratic National Convention. Go back to the last Saturn and Aries. Where was the convention? Chicago. Where was the last Democratic convention in this election cycle? Chicago. But it was off. It was Saturn and Pisces. Right? Okay. Man, there's just so much shit going on. So much shit going on. Let's see what else we have here. Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia attacked military base. I'm telling you, Saturn and Aries, it's fucking violent. Right? September 7th. Tupac Shakur shot, drive-by shooting. Las Vegas. Some people think Tupac's still alive, by the way. But nonetheless, right there, right? Saturn and Aries. It's funny how they didn't want to ban guns when Tupac got shot. He was killed, by the way, by a off-duty police officer that had been hired to do the hit. Okay. All right. Let's see. Oh, Maui's got $130 million worth of compensation. October 6th. So there's a lot of reconciliation going on here for the old colonizers. You got a bomb that goes off in Russia, kills 32 people, right? Republic of Angola officially joins. So one of the things that happens here, which is also interesting, is they start the World Court. That's in 1997. I'm going to show you that in a second. But there's just a shit ton of violence, right? Let's go to 1997. 1997, as the kids say, is a real banger. Yeah, let's just go through this quickly. All right, this is very Saturn and Aries. The emergency alert system is introduced into the United States. First responders, Aries, right? Boom. I don't want that. Get out of there. Turkey threatens Cyprus on account of a deal to buy Russian S-300 missiles. Bill Cosby's kid gets killed. That, I believe, was a sacrifice. You got another exploding rocket. Oh, you got the Hutus, northwest Rwanda. That's lighting off, right? Here we go. On their way to Lebanon, two Israeli troop transport helicopters collide. Why are they going to Lebanon? They're at war. You got a big earthquake. Now, here, you're going to see an eclipse and an earthquake in the same area that follows it. That's coming. North Hollywood shootout. Right there. Okay. Do you see the Dolly thing? Oh, it's weird. So the Dolly thing happens, and then Bill Clinton says, oh, we're going to ban federal funding on any research for human cloning. Yeah, all you're going to do is funnel black budget money, and that'll be just fine. Sri Lanka, you got the Tamil Tigers overrunning a military base, killing over 100 Sri Lankan troops. March 9th, almost 6 months to the day, Notorious B.I.G. murdered in Los Angeles. Boom. Let's see. We got the Sand Line Affair, Bougainville Island, Papua New Guinea. Soldiers Commander Jerry Singarock arrests Tim Spicer as mercenaries down there in New Guinea. Let's see what else we got. Hale Bopp makes its appearance. Oh, guess what else happens? Oh, yeah. The Heaven's Gate. The Heaven's Gate crew decides to beam up Saturn in Aries. Right? Saturn in freaking Aries. And guess what? We got a Sun-Saturn conjunction during that time. So the Hale Bopp thing, which is March 22nd. Now, this is really weird because supposedly Hale Bopp had this companion, right? I don't know if you guys followed this, but Art Bell was working with Ed Dames, okay? And they had brought Courtney Brown into their little remote viewing world. And I used to have Courtney Brown on my show. And they had said, they being Art and Ed Dames, that there was an observatory in Hawaii that had spotted this like companion to Hale Bopp. And Courtney Brown kind of remote viewed this thing and saw this sort of companion thing, like there was like remote viewing sort of evidence. So the Heaven's Gate people were listening to all of this, right? They were all into like chasing UFOs, and they were also doing like weird government shit, right? But they had this idea that this companion that was connected to Hale Bopp was going to be there for them, and they all had to leave the planet at the same time. And what's wild about this is that on the back side of it, because you had Art Bell and Ed Dames and Courtney Brown talking about this shit, Art Bell and Ed Dames completely pounced on Courtney Brown. They told him that the companion thing was a lie, that they were testing his remote viewing abilities, and completely fucked Courtney Brown over. This is exactly what happened. Because they did not want to have any blood on their hands from this Heaven's Gate thing, because they were listening to Art fucking Bell. Who brought up the Art Bell stuff tonight in the chat? That was timely. Okay, so I'm going to just go through a few more of these things here, right? A lot of rockets have some interesting stories to tell. April 21st, the Pegasus rocket carries the remains of 24 people into Earth orbit. The first space burial by Celestis. Huh. I wonder how many of those 29 people were at Heaven's Gate. Okay. Let's keep going here. Tony Blair becomes prime minister. Big fucking deal. The first genetically modified three-parent baby is born. Hello, May 10th. Okay. Let's see. We got the Hmong war veterans. We got to recognize them, of course. Bill Clinton, a lot of apologizing going on. Isn't it interesting? So you have the clerk who's apologizing to the rest of the world for apartheid. You have New Zealand giving the Maoris like $150 million or whatever that is. And then now you have Bill Clinton apologizing to the surviving members of the Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis. That's all like Libra stuff, right? That's all opposite Saturn Aries. It's like the same astrological component with Pluto and Leo and then Aquarius being on the other side. Here you have Libra being very apologetic. Now check this out. Radiohead fucking releases OK Computer. Wrap your head around that. That's nearly 30 years ago. Radiohead releases OK Computer. That is fucking mind-boggling. Absolutely mind-boggling. Let's see. Yeah, the socialists win an election. Tim McVeigh, there you go. He eventually winds up getting executed, I believe, on September 11th of that year, 1997, if I'm not mistaken. Pol Pot's still around. He's still killing people. Right? Here we go. Pol Pot. Another guy who comes onto the world stage, Saturn and Aries, late 60s, 1969, 1970, Pol Pot. And then he flees, but he's still there. Look at this, June 11th. What did I say? Right? United Kingdom House of Commons votes for a total ban on handguns. Right? There's a partial ban. That's Saturn and Aries shit. Right there, right? Aries guns, ballistics, Saturn, the magistrate, no. No. A momentous day. The first Women's National Basketball Association game was played at the Great Western Forum in Los Angeles. David Stern. I can't thank you enough for that. Let's see what else we have. We got more of the Troubles, right? That's about to end eventually, but that's going on in Ireland. The Kosovo War, it gets fired up. That gets real ugly. Bill Clinton winds up going through his impeachment period. During this phase, they wind up essentially blackmailing him to send American troops, both through NATO and as proxies in the Kosovo War, which he did not want to do. He's essentially blackmailed. Gianni Versace gets killed by Andrew Cunanan, a spree killer outside of Versace's Miami Beach residence. Woolworths closes after 117 years. What's interesting about Woolworths is, like, Woolworths was the catalog basically for settlers, right? Like, you didn't have a giant mall in your little settlement town. What you had is you had the Woolworths catalog, and then you ordered out of that, right? Like, that is some Aries shit. You're out there on the frontier, and your wife wants to get that bustier that cute little model in the Woolworths catalog is modeling, and that she might fit into, and you're hoping she does, because she wants to look sexy for you, right? Get that from the Woolworths catalog and a bunch of other stuff. That's what they did. Now Saturn and Aries comes along. You know what that's like? It's like the frontier is closed. The frontier is closed. 117 years later, the Woolworths catalog, which started off basically serving people who were the pioneers, right? The spirit of Aries. It's over. Done. Let's see. Jean Clement, or Calment, the oldest person to have theoretically ever lived, died at 122 years old. 164 days. Jean Calment. Look at Jean. Right there. She was a French supercentenarian. Oh, she was born in Arles. Here's old Gene. All right, what else? Let's get back to the war. This is interesting because South Park debuts on August 13th, and then the year later, the Columbine massacre happens. And both Trey Parker and Matt Stone went to Columbine. We got another massacre, the Beni Ali massacre in Algeria. It kills between 60 to 100 people. We've got another massacre in Rais, Algeria, 400 people. We have the death of Princess Diana, Saturn and Aries. That's a whole show unto itself. 87 more people are killed in another massacre in Algeria. Let's see. Al-Qaeda carries out some terrorist attacks in where? Bosnia and Herzegovina? Yeah, Al-Qaeda, state-sponsored terrorism. Let's see. Wales votes in favor of devolution and the formation of a National Assembly for Wales. So they're kind of splitting off a little bit there. I think the Scots do the same thing. Right? Okay, we got a kid that goes into Pearl High School, Pearl, Mississippi, opens fire, killing 2 girls after killing his mother. That's kind of a prelude for the Columbine massacre, which will happen the following year. We got a lot more people dying in Algeria, right? More violence. This is really weird. Che Guevara gets his remains moved to Cuba on October 17th of 1997. We have WorldCom and MCI, huge merger, telephone companies. Okay. We got more killings at Luxor by Islamic terrorists. We have, let's see, what else? This was weird, right? That was the 700 kids that had epileptic attacks watching an episode of Pokemon anime. Remember, Aries is the head and it's the brain as well. Hong Kong begins to kill a bunch of chickens thanks to bird flu. Okay. We got one more year here. Let me just do one more year, and this is going to be 1998. And then we're going to go just take a little trip back into the 60s. We're just going to do 1968 just to show you the amount of violence that is almost one-to-one. Okay. So here we go. We got more people being killed in Algeria. Now we got, okay, after the United States, now you got the European nations. They agreed to forbid human cloning. This is on the heels of the Dolly thing, right? Drudge Report, boom. The Lewinsky thing happens. And Clinton, if I'm not mistaken, doesn't he have Saturn in Libra in his chart? Let me just look quickly here. I think Bill Clinton is also a Libra rising. So let's just do a quick look here about Clinton's chart. Astrology chart, just real quick rundown here, quickly. Astro theme, because there's some Libra thing going on with Clinton that's pretty significant, right? So yeah, he's a Libra rising, so he's got Mars in Libra as well, and Neptune in Libra, and then Saturn is opposing his ascendant, opposing Mars, and opposing Neptune. Both he and Monica Lewinsky had moons in Taurus, right? So Clinton is literally being put on the grill to Barbie, right? That's what's happening with Clinton. And I think ultimately it's happening because they want to hold the impeachment over his head so that he will wind up playing ball with what's going to happen later in Kosovo, and also with Iran, Iraq, by the way. All right, so let's keep going here quickly. We have a cable car disaster. Military pilot caused up 20 people to Trento, Italy with his low-flying EA-6B Prowler. It's a cable car. Okay, you got a big earthquake in Afghanistan. I'm going to show you quickly the eclipse, the full solar eclipse of the earthquake happens there. Now, this is interesting, right? So in February 20, remember, we're going to be in Saturn and Aries territory until the end of this year. And then right at the end of the year, it begins its kind of movement towards Saturn and Taurus. So here we've got Andrew Wakefield, right? Publishes the article in the Lancet about vaccines, autism. He's got to walk it back, right? It's the authority, right? It's just like the same authority, Bill Clinton apologizing, to the guys who unfortunately were given syphilis. Clerk, it's sort of similar. He has to walk it back. He doesn't apologize, but he's got to walk it back. Okay, there's more here. Got a shooting at the West Side Middle School. Again, violence, precursor to Columbine, which is coming. More violence in Algeria. More deaths in Algeria. Okay, we got the Kosovo army, Yugoslav army ambushed the Kosovo liberation, killing 19. I'm just telling you, this is a fucking violent period. Really, really violent. You get the first euro coins. They're minted in Pessac, France. So the euro's coming, right? You got the Eritreans. They're fighting against the Ethiopians. Riots directed against Chinese Indonesians. In Indonesia, 1,000 are killed. You get your Windows operating system that gets cranked up. This is interesting here, okay? You got a nuclear test, right? A nuclear test, series of Indian nuclear tests. Pakistan explodes 5 nuclear devices. So you got all this nuclear shit going on. Oh, Afghanistan, right? Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Saturn and Aries. Where are we now? Pakistan and India again, right? Astrological echo. The European Central Bank is established. Not a great thing. Let's see. We've got more war in Guinea-Bissau. That's going on. You got sanctions against Libya. They're coming. You got a Mars probe by Japan. Saturn's in Aries. Mars ruled. Right. You got a big earthquake in New Guinea, Papua New Guinea. All this crazy shit is going on. Right. Crazy. You got a bombing here at the U.S. Embassy in Dar es Salaam. Kills 200. Could you imagine all this shit happening now? Like, there's things happening in the world. Like, you have, like, whatever's going on in Ukraine and Russia. We know that's happening. Whatever's going on with Israel, Yemen, Israel, Lebanon, Israel, Palestine. We know that's happening. Well, what else is really going on? Like, this is global in scale, this violence. Google, by the way, cranked up September 4th. Saturn and Aries. Half-Life became the most popular video game, one of the most influential first-person shooter game. Comes out, Saturn and Aries, first-person shooter game. What else we have here? Hugo Chavez. This is really this Yugoslav Kosovo thing becomes brutal. Absolutely brutal. Oh, look, you got the Khmer Rouge. Now they're apologizing. That's the Libra effect in opposition with Saturn and Aries. Crazy, 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 crazy shit. Crazy shit. What is this? Let's take a look at 1968. I'm just giving you some background here, and then I'm just going to get into Saturn, Aries, Neptune conjunction prognostications, or at least what I think has the potential to happen. Okay. All right. So this is 1968. Okay. Let's just go through some of this. Vietnam War. You're going to see a lot of this. Battle of Khe Sanh. Wow. Huge. One of the most publicized and controversial battles of the war begins. Huge. Saturn and Aries. Right? There you go. The USS Pueblo claiming the North Korea. Right? Seizes USS Pueblo. Claims the ship. The Israeli submarine INS Dakar sinks in the Mediterranean Sea, killing 69. Ooh. The Tet Offensive. The Viet Cong. This is like the infamous Tet Offensive. Launch a series of surprise attacks across South Vietnam. South Vietnam. Viet Cong soldiers attacked the embassy of the United States in Saigon. Look at that. Huge, right? Big. It's all Vietnam War shit, but there's more. There's more coming here. It won't just be the Vietnam War. There's other stuff happening. Vietnam War, Phong Nhi, Phong Nhat massacre. The Tet Offensive is halted. The Ha Mai massacre, right? All heavy-duty war. Andrew Lloyd Webber puts on just about amazing Technicolor. Dreamcoat, getting warmed up for Jesus Christ Superstar, which will come later. What else we have here? Unrecognized Rhodesia executes 3 black citizens. First execution since UDI, prompting international condemnation. Well, Rhodesia probably executed them because they had probably been involved in some kind of terrorist attack against the people of Rhodesia. The rest of the world is going to condemn them. By the way, Rhodesia is fighting for its independence during this time. Those Saturn and Aries. Their leader, Ian Smith, also happened to be an Aries. So we got a lot of Vietnam War, Laotian conflict, right? A lot of it. My Lai Massacre, Saturn and Aries. The gold standard. The United States repeals the requirement for a gold reserve to back the U.S. currency. This is Nixon getting ready to eventually peg the dollar to the petrocurrency. We have the rise of Afrocentrism and Black Power. Saturn and Aries, right? This is going to be 60 years later. And I think the fatigue has set in just a bit. Let's see what else we have here. Brazilian high school student Edson Luis de Lima Suto shot by the police in a protest for cheaper meals at a restaurant for low-income students. The aftermath of his death is one of the first major events against the military dictatorship. So it's also a time of revolution, you know, and we're not even into the Paris summer here. Martin Luther King, dead, right? RFK Jr. will also be shot during this year. Saturn and Aries. That's going to happen. You got a shootout between the Black Panthers and police in Oakland. Tons of violence. Let's see. Jim Clark is killed. And what else do we have here? Pierre Trudeau becomes the 15th Prime Minister of Canada. Saturn and Aries, conservative British politician Enoch Powell makes a controversial Rivers of Blood speech. And he was right. His timing was off. But, blood is Aries. And Pal, of course, represents, part of the parliament, right? Because he's part of the hierarchy with Saturn. Let's see, here we go. Things about to get hot, right? Student protests are starting to cook up. Columbia University protests of 1968. Here we go, the Paris student riots. Like, de Gaulle actually left the fucking country, right? He left the country. He was convinced that they were going to overthrow him. He eventually came back. That's how bad these riots were. What were they? They were basically socialist / communist rights. A great day in my life, Mattel's released Hot Wheels on May 18th. It's a major day in my life. You've got, let's see, the Biafran disaster, which is what? Starving, June 5th. Shot at the Ambassador Hotel, Los Angeles, right? June 5th. June is a Gemini date. You have a killer with two names that are the same. Sirhan, we believe is still alive, isn't he? I believe he's still in jail. You have the second Kennedy, who's killed, which is also a brother, which also falls into Gemini, right? Gemini, his brother was a Gemini. They're both killed right on or near the 33rd degree parallel. He's the second person that year who is a major either politician or quote unquote humanitarian. Martin Luther King, who was killed, also near the 33rd degree parallel in Memphis, Tennessee. So now you've got a bunch of really intense symbolism here. Rosemary's Baby is released on June 12th. Saturn in Aries, of course, the director of Rosemary's Baby is none other than Roman Polanski, who, again, theoretically will have his wife's baby cut out and removed from her in the Tate LaBianca murders, which will happen not very long after this, right? So keep that in mind, right? Like Rosemary's Baby, released under Saturn in Aries. Let's see, we got demonstrations in Brazil. They're happening everywhere. You got a football stampede in Buenos Aires, killing a bunch of people. What else? Saddam Hussein. That's interesting. Becomes the vice chairman of the Revolutionary Council in Iraq. So you have in 1996, under Saturn and Aries, Bibi Netanyahu becoming the guy, right, in Israel for the next 30 years. Saddam Hussein takes over in 1968, but by 1996, 1997, his time is running out, right? His time is running out. It's just going to be a few brief years before Saddam is gone. It doesn't end under Saturn and Aries, but if you go back and you look at that time period, in that Saturn and Aries period, right after Gulf War I, they've got all these embargoes that are against Iraq. There's a no-fly zone over Iraq, so Iraq can't really get anything in. They basically want to put Saddam Hussein under a global siege. That's what they're doing, right? So they're trying to literally end his reign before the second Gulf War starts. But he comes into power here in Saturn and Aries, just like Netanyahu comes into power, Saturn and Aries. Saturn and Aries round 2, like in the late 90s, Saddam Hussein is being ushered out of power. See how this works? Good. The first international Special Olympics are held at Soldier Field in Chicago. Intel is formed. Look at that. July 18th. Intel is formed. That's right. Let's see. We've got some Vietnam War stuff coming up here. More of that. Oh, let's see. The last steam passenger train runs in England. France explodes its first hydrogen bomb. Oh boy. Let's see. The crash of Air France Flight 1611 kills 95 people, including French Army General René Cognier, as the Caravel jetliner plunges into the Mediterranean Sea. Following a fire while making its approach to Nice. Doesn't end up very well, does it? You got the Tet Offensive finally comes to an end. Holy shit. That went on for a long ass fucking time, didn't it? You got a coup d'etat in Panama. Omar Torrijos overthrows a democratic elected but highly controversial president, Arnulfo Arias. Torrijos will himself will be overthrown eventually. Yes, all dictators meet the same end. The Summer Olympics in Mexico City begin, and they're very radical, aren't they? You got your Black Power salutes, Tommy Smith, John Carlos, right there. Bob Beamon breaks the long jump record because it's in Mexico City and the altitude is high. The air is thinner and he can fly higher. But you just got more and more violence, war, right? You've got the start of the 1968 movement in Pakistan, which leads to the resignation General Ayub Khan and the split. Now you've got Bangladesh coming out of that. Yeah. So you get the drift, right? It's 1968, fucking violent. Kennedy's killed, MLK's killed. You've got shootouts with the Black Panthers. You've got the riots, the revolution in Paris, right? And now, here you go. Mao Zedong advocates the educated urban youth in China be sent to re-education in the countryside. Yeah, that's your Saturn and Aries moment, right? Like, no, you're gonna go fucking pick, you're gonna go plant rice. You're gonna come up the hard way here. That's Saturn and Aries. Yeah, you're not gonna be able to do what you want to do. I'm gonna fucking tell you, right? I'm gonna tell you what to do. You have no rights. You have no ability to flex your individual will. Saturn and Aries, that is some top-down shit. I'm telling you, right? Oh, we got one more. The 1968 Israeli raid on Lebanon. So again, what I'm attempting to share with you guys is that these last two Saturn Aries cycles, and I'm not even going back to the late 1930s, which is the run-up to World War II, by the way. I'm not even going back that far. The late 90s are incredibly violent. There's war everywhere, right? And you would think that these wars are, well, they're just not connected. They're not connected. They're simply violence popping up. And I wouldn't necessarily completely agree with that, by the way. I think some of these wars are a lot more connected than, we'd like to admit. But go back to 1968, right? You still have what's going on with Northern Ireland. You've got Vietnam going through the fucking roof, the Tet Offensive. Again, and it extends out to 69, right? It doesn't stop in 1968. It keeps going, right? It just keeps going. I didn't read this, but December 13th of 1968, prompted by growing unrest and a perceived proliferation of pro-communist violent actions, Brazilian Arthur de Costa e Silva enacts the so-called AI-5, the fifth of a series of non-constitutional emergency decrees, allegedly helped stabilize the country after the turmoils of the early 60s. That means that they're going to kick people out. That's what happened with Caetano Veloso and George Ben, right? They got kicked out. They went to London because they were basically political prisoners. Somewhere in 1968, date unknown, the Khmer Rouge is formed, right? The Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. And what happens? What, 1996, 97, 90, what year was it? Oh, well, the Khmer Rouge and Pol Pot apologized. There was a lot of apologizing going on in the late 90s, right? But that starts, the Khmer Rouge starts Saturn and Aries. Like, and how fucking bloody was the Khmer fucking Rouge? So I'm just giving you a bit of a historical reminder of what was going down during these Saturn and Aries periods. It's kind of heavy, right? It is kind of freaking heavy. And in 68, there is clearly a major war. It's the Vietnam War. But there's all these smaller wars happening too. In the 90s, the late 90s, there are a bunch of smaller wars. But if you added them all up, it sure as hell felt like, because of where they were all happening, kind of a world war. And that's also the Bin Laden stuff is, you're running up like they're running up to 9/11, 2001, which begats a whole other series of wars. Okay, so we've established that. Done. All right. What does that mean for Saturn and Aries moving forward? Well, we get a brief glimpse of it. Again, it's not very long. It's really less than 2 months. It's kind of like when Pluto went into Aquarius briefly, and then it retrograded out and went back into Capricorn for a much longer period of time than this will. So we're just having a bit of a glimpse, right? A bit of a glimpse, but you can get a window onto like where it's going long term, which again happens next year in February, right? It was February 15th of next year. Saturn, Neptune conjunct 0 degrees Aries. Okay. So there are some themes that we are already seeing, right? Already seen. You go back to the last time Saturn was in Aries. Who is it? Is it de Klerk who's apologizing for apartheid? Here we go. Saturn in Aries comes around. What are we dealing with? We're dealing with refugees from South Africa. The African National Congress, right? Takes over when? Saturn in Aries. And what are we seeing now? Exactly what I was talking about. Okay, now this is going to get into some territory that may make people feel uncomfortable. Okay. One of the things that we are witnessing now more than ever, Joan showed me this comedian. Her name is, I think her name is like LaDonna something. She's based out of Austin, and based is a word that I would use in relation to this woman. Like she is, she doesn't give a fuck, right? She does not give a flying fuck about what people think around her commentary about things like black fatigue or the third rail. And I'm watching this woman. I'm like, holy shit. This woman could not have existed 4 years ago. She could not have existed 4 years ago. Her videos are on YouTube now. I don't know how long they're going to be there, but they're on YouTube. And she is very funny, but she's also, for some people, quite offensive. And then she's also got like a straight side where she does kind of news commentary and breaks things down in sort of humorous context. And the reason I'm bringing her up is because I'll just really cut to the chase here. White people have had enough shit, right? They have had enough shit. And if you go on YouTube and if you think that I am echoing a statement or a sentiment that is not shared, not only by other white people, so-called white people, there are so-called black people who share the same sentiment. And they are basically looking at people in their own in-group and they're saying, y'all been acting, a fucking fool. And we're tired of it. We're tired of having to deal with it and look at it. Now, there are some people who believe that this is all a setup for genocide or camps or wherever your paranoid mind wants to go, right? Because the rubber band was bound to snap back. Okay. And I had talked about this years ago. And I said that Gen Z is going to be the snapback of the rubber band. Because they basically don't give a fuck, right? And so what you're seeing now, and I've never seen this before, in all the years that I've lived on this, whatever you want to call it, I'll call it an egg. I have never seen anything like this, right? Watching so-called white people basically stand up and say, done. It started with the Dilbert guy. Scott, what's his name? He basically said the quiet part out loud, right? Done. And this is not a condemnation of every single black person, please. This is not what I'm talking about. This is not a condemnation, right? But what's happened is that we have gone through this social engineering, which has taken place, and we have had groups pitted against one another. This is really, I think, 2010. 2010, there seems to be a bit of a sea change. And it's really, we get really heavily into it in Obama 2.0, because Obama has no other platform, right? 2.0 Obama is going to be about race. There's a little bit in Obama 1.0. That's really about Obamacare and a bunch of other stuff. Now he's got to have a new plank, right? And that new plank is going to be social justice and equity. And this is where a lot of this is. It's all socially engineered, right? It is all socially engineered. And then during that second Obama term, that's when Black Lives Matter begins to populate the White House. D. Ray McKesson is on the White House guest list many, many times, right? So Obama is working with Black Lives Matter to help create Black Lives Matter. And Black Lives Matter is the fuse that sets everything off. Everything. Boom, right? And after George Floyd and the summer of Floyd, there's all of this it's like reimagining and revisioning law enforcement. That all happens post George Floyd, right? There's a rush to end cash bail, or, there's all these things that happen to accommodate the culture of grievance that comes out of Jordan. It's like you have all these apologies that are happening during the 90s for all these things that had happened before. That happens during George Floyd or post George Floyd. You've got all these people are apologizing for whatever, right? The guy who runs Chick-fil-A, is apologizing, shining the shoes of, some random black dude. We should all do. By the way, Chick-fil-A, like, they're fucking phonies. They're phonies. Every year, Chick-fil-A sends they did for, I don't know if they're still doing it, but they would send a group of upper management to the Aspen Institute of Ideas, which, when you think about it, the Aspen Institute of Ideas is completely counterintuitive to Chick-fil-A's Christian mission and closing on Sunday, right? So they're kind of phonies, actually. It's sort of like the whole Christian thing for them in some ways is a big virtue signal. It's a big virtue signal. Anyway, I don't want to get caught in the weeds here with that. But this is what happened, right? This is what happened post George Floyd. And all of a sudden, Gavin Newsom says, hey, if you happen to steal $975 of merchandise from a store, you're just going to get a ticket. What do you think that did? It opened the fucking floodgates of theft in San Francisco. Walgreens literally left San Francisco. They couldn't be there anymore because they were getting raided all the time. And then what would happen is that you would have London Breed, who is the mayor, basically making excuses for all those thefts and say, no, that's not the reason why they happened. That's not the reason why Walgreens is leaving. It was indefensible. It was totally indefensible. And it's the same thing that's happening now with what's going on with the refugees from South Africa and the denial of what's taking place with the farmland. That's not happening. No, that's not the reason why they're leaving. It's not the reason why Walgreens. It's bullshit, right? But I'm just telling you, the reason why this thing is snapping back is because of all of this socially engineered bullshit, which already took place, and they re-envisioned law enforcement. And all of a sudden now you got a group of people who have been, and this is a terrible disservice. I'm sorry, not sorry, but a terrible disservice to those people. Basically saying, go ahead. You're a preferred class now. You're a privileged class. You can take $965 of merchandise. Yeah, that's fine. We're not going to do anything. Oh yeah, you want to destroy an Arby's because they ran out of your favorite sauce. It's okay, right? All of this happened even before George Floyd. Like, if you look at the Freddie Gray event in Baltimore, where Freddie Gray was picked up, he was high on drugs. He's kind of like George Floyd 1.0, and he's in the back of their paddy wagon van, and he's so fucked up and freaked out that he's literally like playing human pinball on the inside of the van that's taking him away. So that by the time Freddie Gray gets into custody, right, he's got all these injuries. He's sustained a huge amount of biological trauma from the drugs he's taking, the amount of adrenaline he's pumped into his system, the anxiety, right, whatever kind of internal in. Freddie Gray was like, he put himself in that place. Like, if you look at the Freddie Gray report, that's what happened with Freddie Gray. Freddie Gray dies. He wasn't beaten up, right? He was drugged up and threw himself around like a freaking banshee on the inside of the wagon that was taking him away. There's a huge riot that takes place in Baltimore. The mayor and the city attorney decide to let the riot happen. Famous scene outside of Memorial Stadium in Baltimore, where literally baseball fans are coming out of the Oriole game and they're getting assaulted. Okay. And the mayor and the city attorney decided, for the good of the public, that it was going to be kind of a release. And it's the same thing that happened post George. All of this was happening, right? It was like, we're going to let all of these things happen, and there's going to be zero repercussions for them. This is part of the social engineering. And who do you have that are mayors of most of these cities where these events are taking place? Who are the mayors? Well, they're black women, right? They're black women who are weaned on socialism. And by the way, there's a huge bait and switch that happens in America's cities, which I've pointed out. If you go back, for a long time, America's cities were governed by so-called white males, okay? Just the way it was. There's a sea change that happens. And it happens kind of across the board in America, right? In LA, you have Tom, what's his name? Who becomes the mayor of LA. What the fuck is his last name? In Detroit, you've got Coleman Young. In Atlanta, you've got Andrew Young. In Oakland, eventually you have Ron Dellums. So you have these black mayors who are males who become mayors of American cities. And they're all Democrats, by the way. Tom Bradley. He's a police chief, so you can trust him, right? And it's kind of this bait and switch. It's kind of like, okay, this is how the social engineers work. And in this instance, we're talking communist, socialist, social engineers. It's like, okay, we are going to, a lot of these American cities have high, black urban populations. So we want to have a representative government. We're going to go down that path, and we're going to have black male mayors. And if you're generally like an American who isn't white or who isn't black, you're white, and you're looking at these cities, you're going to say, well, at least they're men, right? Like, that's going to go through your head. Well, at least they're men. They're men, and, generally men are they're the pillars of society. You have David Dinkins in New York. There's another version of it, right? You have these men, they're black. They start to become mayors of these cities. But then guess what? They don't stay men. They become women. And it's like this bait and switch. It's like, okay, we're good. All right, they're black, okay, but they're men, and we can trust them. Because generally you can trust men. But now we have these black female mayors, and they come in, and guess what? They're the boots on the ground, right? They're the boots on the ground they're the ones that are essentially guiding the boots on the ground. Mayor of DC, Mayor of Baltimore, Mayor of San Francisco. There it is, just spelling it out, right? Now you've got Karen, what's her name, in Los Angeles, latest iteration. And so we have the violence, we have the revisioning of law enforcement. Police officers are going to be social workers now. They're going to get rid of the cash bail. We're going to let people steal up to close to $1,000 again. Like, it's all a fucking setup, right? And then if you're part of that community or a sliver of that community, and you're going to take advantage of that, so I'm going to get mine, right? I'm going to get mine. And again, I'm not saying that if I wasn't part of that group, that I wouldn't be doing the same thing. And I'm not even just talking about like stealing shit, right? But I'm like, you know what? Jason Whitlock talks about this. And he said, if I wanted to, and I wanted to, basically be an angry black man and always talking about race and bringing race up, I'd make a shit ton of money. And he would. He absolutely would. And I know that there are people in that world who are grifters. They're Mark Lamont Young is kind of a bit of a grifter in some ways, right? Like even Van Jones is kind of a grifter. And Van Jones is a really intelligent guy. And that Van Jones got on that wave. And the next thing you know, he can't even be objective. He just has to mimic the party line. Because at that point, he needs to keep his job on MSNBC or wherever the fuck he's working. Because he's gone down that path too far. It's like, okay, well, I'll accept the grift because I'm getting paid. And that's a big part of this too. Like, people notice this, right? They fucking notice it, and it's like Maxine Waters, part of the fucking grift. Now you've got Jasmine Lockett, Maxine Waters 2.0. Jasmine Lockett, by the way, is an Aries, part of the grift, and people are watching this, and they know we have the internet. Like, Jasmine Lockett was a nice, well-mannered girl, right? Before she got elected, she spoke eloquently. And now, she's Jasmine Lockett, right? So people have seen this. And you can say, this is all socially engineered and the psyop. And, now it's time to turn on, Black America because they want a race war. I mean, look, this is where we're going with Saturn and Aries, and it's part of the discussion. We've been talking about Neptune and Aries, the ghosts of the Civil War, right? Did a whole show dedicated to that. Here comes Saturn. And Saturn is kind of twofold here. And there's going to be many, many, many places we can go with Saturn and Aries. But let's just start with the twofold expression. The first is like what we're seeing now, which is the result of what I would call black fatigue. And again, I'm not the only one that's noticing it. You can see plenty of videos from the so-called black community that are on the same subject, same topic, right? It's happening. But on the white side of it all, right? On the white side of it all, the group that has been the most tolerant, the group that voted for Barack Obama to assuage whatever lingering white guilt they may have had, or to celebrate the fact that civil rights was reaching its crowning achievement with Barack Obama elected as president, right? Those are the people who were cheering the most loudly. And I guarantee you there's a portion of those people right now who are having a very different experience. And they're like, I can't believe I voted for that fucking guy. Or they're like, yeah, I'm not real happy where all that went. Because in as much as there were so-called blacks fighting for civil rights, there were whites right alongside of them, right? You had the freedom buses, you had all these people marching. It was really like a team effort, right? I mean, it was really a team effort. John Kennedy sent he sent basically the National Guard, he sent the Army, and I believe the Army, if I'm not mistaken, right? He sent it down into Alabama, right? Alabama. John Kennedy, front lines, civil rights. Lyndon Baines Johnson, the war on poverty. The Great Welfare State, which was a scam. But there were people, right? There were people. This is where the liberal attitude, right? The sort of the great American liberal attitude, really develops. It's like, okay, well, I'm all for it. I'm all for all We're good. We're down. Let's go. And that continued, right? It's like there was like, you get into the 70s and, you know, outside of Boston where they were forcing busing another place, like California, man's melting pot. We're super melting pot. And by that time, you know, these marches, the Watts riots, Detroit burning, it's kind of in the past. Even shit like, you know, the Black Panthers shooting out in 1968. 1976, 77 rolls around. It's dazed and confused, and we're all hanging out with each other, right? We're literally smoking off the same joint. Wrap that around your head. Right? If there was, I mean, like that is, like that to me, that is like the peace pipe of the 70s. And a lot of that was just based on the fact that, you know, we're embracing who we are. Like, you're part of our country. You're part of our culture. We're all part of the same thing. Like, that's where we were. And there had to be like a part of the so-called white community that extended that olive branch and that handshake or the hug or whatever you want to call it. Hell, we had Brian's song with James Caan and Billy D. Williams, which was the Brian Piccolo, Gail Sayer story. Are you fucking kidding me? Right? Like, how many dudes watched that and fucking cried? We all did. Right? And a lot of us played football, you know, and that was kind of what was going on then. And it was all based on this idea and sense that we wanted to have an integrated country, right? And it was like, okay, what did Martin Luther King say? We'll judge people not by their color, but the quality of their character. And that was something that people embraced, you know, across, you know, the racial spectrum. Those words, right? Those words. And we were cool. We were good with it. Right? But then things fucking changed. They fucking changed in 2010, 2012, and then the psychological operation began in a much bigger way than it ever had been before. But here we are, 2025, and people are just out of patience. They're just out of patience. Saturn and Aries, there is going to be a lot more of an attack on what we would call white culture. There is going to be an attack on it because it is going to reverberate around this thing with South Africa, right? This whole kind of quote unquote black fatigue thing. And there is going to be one last push to smear and blanket all white people as endemically racist. This is Saturn Aries. It is coming, right? It is the final sociological, psychologically engineered operation, the one final push to somehow, right? To somehow get people so pissed off at so-called white people that there will be all-out attacks on them. If you think I'm kidding, I'm not kidding. I just go through TikTok and read the stuff from the Carmelo Anthony event, right? Carmelo Anthony is going to graduate on stage with the rest of his class. Wrap your head around that, okay? If you don't think that that is a socially and politically divisive moment that could set people off, just wait. Just wait, okay? You're just hearing about it now because it was just announced. He's going to be that guy is going to walk across the stage and get his diploma with the rest of his class. Just wrap your head around that for a minute. This is all an attempt to pit us against one another. Right? It's all an attempt to pit us against one another. And at this point in time, the social engineering on the white side is like, we're tired, we're done, we've run out of patience, and go ahead and just cross that line or take the first swing or whatever it is, right? Whatever it is, you got this whole group of people who are just as socially engineered in some ways as the other group. And what are they going to do? They will not be passive. They will not be riding the buses. This will not be about the freedom buses, right? It will not be about the freedom buses. It will be something very, very different. Now, do I want that? I do not want that. I've said this before, because if you have something like that, you got your Saturn and Aries, clamp down martial law, right? Clamp down. If you want to get rid of the Second Amendment, all you got to do is have a public shooting gallery, because two different groups don't like each other anymore. You want to get rid of the Second Amendment? There you go. Right? If we have the equivalent of another version of the Civil War, again, Neptune and Aries, the ghost thereof, right? I guarantee you the Second Amendment will be gone. It'll be gone. And that'll be after whatever kind of clampdown they've done in order to like stop whatever violence could happen. Okay? So we are drifting. We're drifting into that zone. Now, I am also going to tell you with Saturn and Aries, whether you like to hear this or not, you know, if you are spiritually inclined and you don't see color, and that's fine, right? I get it. I totally get it. But you are going to see, quote unquote, white people under Saturn and Aries not only, you know, be the focus on attacks like Al Sharpton the other day and some of these other people, but you're going to see white people not being afraid to be white anymore, right? Like you will hear as a reaction to some of this white power. I'm giving it to you as an astrologer, right? I'm just giving it to you as an astrologer. It is coming, right? You are going to see this reformation of a white identity under Saturn and Aries. It's going to happen. It's already happening. And we're not even in it yet, right? We're not even in it. Now, would it be better if we were just like Americans? Sure, it'd be better because there's room for everybody at that table. You can be black, you can be white, you can be brown. Everybody can sit at that table. What do we have in common? Well, we have being an American common. Well, what does that mean? Well, then we define that. Like, oh, yeah, we define that. Well, yeah, okay, we agree, right? Do they want that? Probably not. They want us divided and conquered and split up and at each other's throats. We've seen this forever. But this is kind of where this is going. Now, here we go. This is going to be race adjacent. Okay, race adjacent. You've also got a group of people, again, Saturn and Aries, who are kind of over the overt flex of Israel, dual citizenship, and so-called Jewish power. I'm just the messenger. I'm just telling you. I'm just the messenger. That is race adjacent, and that is another form of this. And of course, both groups are tied into other epochs and wars which have never really been resolved. The first group is tied into the Civil War, which I've already brought up, right? And it wasn't about the thing that they told us. It was states' rights. It was tariffs. It was a bunch of other stuff. Way down the list was slavery, right? The other group, race adjacent, World War II. And what comes out of World War II? Of course, it's the Holocaust. The Holocaust is probably the bigger story that comes out of World War II versus World War II, right? So now you've got that. And now you have that group is becoming very nervous because this other group, which is basically saying, hey, I'm kind of tired of this other shit. Well, they're saying, well, I'm really tired of this shit. Right? Whether it's dual citizens, what I mean by dual citizens, if you don't know what I mean, that means people who are also a citizen of Israel, who are a citizen of the United States. It doesn't mean that you're a citizen of Guatemala and the United States or Mexico and the United States in the term that I'm referring to, okay? Because they have a lobby, and that lobby is invested in this connection between these two countries, and people are not digging it. They're like, hey, what about America first? Like, this is what Trump has done. He's kind of awakened the sleeping giant, right? All these people are going, well, okay, yeah, what's going on here? And he gave them their tongue back. Oh, yeah, what the fuck? What are these people doing? How did they get so much sway and pull here? How did that happen? I'm not sure I agreed to that, right? It's like, wow. And, oh, these people over here, man, they're just a privileged class. How did this happen? Right? This is what Trump did. So, of course, Trump is going to be charged with being racist because he's the guy, he's the hit. No, Trump just kind of shook people up a little bit. Now they're waking up. Like, holy shit. There's a lot of America here that's kind of been given away, vanished, corrupted. How do we get it back? And by the way, I just want to point out that it's not just so-called white people. Yeah, there are people who are race adjacent to the conversation that we're talking about. They're having the same moment, right? So there are all these people that are kind of like waking up, and it's like, well, these guys here did this, and these guys here did this, and they've manipulated the situation to put us against one another. But at the same time, I can't really go here because, man, this is really brutal, and I don't agree with it, and we need to put it. I mean, like, this is what's happening, right? Now, Neptune is interesting because it comes in, and what can it do? Well, Neptune helps look for scapegoats, right? Because that's what Neptune does. Neptune rules Pisces. Hey, yeah, it does, right? Hello, this is Placidus, Western astrology, not sidereal. Neptune rules Pisces. So Neptune looks for scapegoats. And this is part of the Neptune-Saturn thing. We're looking for fucking scapegoats, right? Like, somebody's fucked the system over. Somebody's fucked it up. So we're on the hunt. Now, some groups will say, well, we're in this position because, whites are systemically racist. Well, there's your scapegoat there. Plenty of scapegoats to go around. Plenty. And again, this is not just the U.S. This is global. Because as we saw before, right, in the 90s, all this violence was really a global thing. And even in 68, you had Vietnam, but you had the war at home with the protests. You had all this shit going on in Ireland. You had what was happening in France with all these riots, right? Like, shit was lit. South America, you got, you get the Brazilians kicking them out, going to prison. So this is what happens, right? It's not just an American issue. But Saturn is now moving into the fourth house of the American chart. That's right. America's fourth house just happens to be Aries. And that's where Chiron lives. So the Saturn transit of America's fourth house is heavy. It's a heavy transit. Usually when Saturn goes through there, in a natal chart, people move. So are people going to try to leave the country under the potential heaviness and threat of martial law, which could be looming with Saturn and Aries? Question mark. Or will the country itself be very different by the time Saturn transits through the American fourth house chart? I'll show you because I actually have that chart. And I'll even bring in some transits here with that so you guys can see this. USA, USA. All right, hold on. Okay, here we go. All right, this is the U.S. natal chart. Right here. I'm going to bring it up so y'all can see it. All right, so there's the IC. Neptune is just coming in to the U.S. natal chart. That's a heavy transit, by the way. It's a very heavy transit. The feeling I get from Neptune there is like there's a feeling of poverty with Neptune, you know, homelessness. There's a sense of homelessness here, dispossession. I mean, even with the Civil War, right? Like this chart existed pre-Civil War. So Neptune was going to, what goes into the U.S. chart, right? At the start of the Civil War. And then you have this, what follows ultimately is dispossession. You have people that are dispossessed of their homes, right? You have a lot of plantation cities that are burned. Like it's a very heavy time, very, very heavy time. And again, even with like Neptune in the fourth house, it's like the South becomes the scapegoat for everything. And Neptune breeds scapegoats. Saturn coming through the fourth house. There's kind of a reformative quality to it. And that's happening soon, right? Like that's happening in 2026. But the reformative part, I don't think comes until later, right? Like when Neptune gets to, 9, 10 Aries and starts to trine, Saturn in the U.S. chart, I think that is kind of a sea change, a bit of a sea change, right? Like when Saturn through Aries, it's been through here before, but not like a time like this. When it squares and hits that Pluto, the natal Pluto at 27 in Capricorn, that's a heavy transit. That's a very heavy transit. Like even in like 1968, when Saturn was going through the fourth house of the U.S. in Aries, it was a very heavy time. Very, very heavy time. At home. It's almost like the war at home, right? And even that 90s period, they were trying to do the war at home with, people like Tim McVeigh and Ted Kaczynski and our guy from the bombing, Richard Jewell. But this is a different spin with Saturn here. And all the things that have been really charged. I could easily see Saturn going through the fourth house and having a martial law effect. But there's something that comes out of this, right? There's something that comes out of this period that is a very different United States. A very different United States. And it's either going to be a United States that is basically forced together through this Saturn transit. And that can look a number of different ways. Or it's a United States where there is one leader that emerges as a type of Caesar with Saturn and Aries in the fourth house. And I believe it's the latter. That's what I think. That's where I think this is all going. And I'm not sure it's Donald Trump. I don't think it's Donald Trump. He is for now. But I don't think the person that we're talking about is Donald Trump. And it feels to me like maybe it's JD Vance, but it feels to me like that person will be the person that will guide the new America. But it feels very different than the place that we're currently in now. It feels very, very, and some people might not like that new America. I don't think it will be as socially liberal as it is now. Not even close. Not even freaking close. Yeah, it's going to be very different. I also feel like there's going to be this backlash against sexual promiscuity and freedom. Like I can just see, I can feel it coming. And it's not quite like Handmaid's Tale territory, but it's going to evolve in sexuality, partnering, promiscuity. Something's going to change radically around it. And it could be just like the morals of like Gen Z, like flipping, right? Like I feel like that is part of the story. But by the time Saturn goes from here to here in the US chart, which is 2030, we're in Agenda 2030 territory, right? This is when Saturn goes into Taurus. This is going to be a very different place. And we've got 3 years of Saturn. We've got Uranus and Gemini, Neptune and Aries, Pluto and Aquarius, all super volatile, all really super. And I'm not saying this is all going to be bad, by the way. Not all going to be bad, but it's going to be different. And there are going to be people who will not be down with the program. And there's going to be very little choice. I'm just saying, right? There's going to be very little choice. You're going to be down with the program. If you're not down with the program, I'm not sure you're going to get the benefits of the reward that the program will give you, whether it's going to be universal basic income or the ability to use the internet or whatever the fuck it is, right? Like the free lunch is going to come to an end. It's just the way it is. And there's going to be like a mandate for all Americans. Now, as far as the global situation goes with Saturn and Aries, I have no doubt that Europe would like nothing more than to have an extended ground war with Russia. I sincerely hope it does not happen, but Europe is in trouble, right? Europe is in big trouble. Huge trouble. You have economies that are kind of imploding. You have the replacements who are being replaced by new replacements. And even the people who were replaced by the replacements are still reeling by being replaced by the replacements. Well, the replacements are going to be reeling by being replaced by new replacements. That's Europe. And so Europe has got major problems. And, anytime, countries have economic crises or crises of borders, there's wars. And Europe has always been the seat of almost every single major fucking war, in recorded history. Yeah, some take place in Turkey or the Middle East or Russia, but Europe, man, just go through the historical canon of all the fucking wars with the Gauls and the Franks and the Normans. That's just like, war after war after war after war after war, right? Am I right? Spain, the Reconquista, and all this shit, man. Literally 500 years of trying to kick the Moors out. War. And then you get into World War I, World War II, right? Saturn and Aries. It's a violent period. It is not limited to the U.S. It is global. Now, Trump, his little peace tour in the Middle East, Abraham Accords. Okay, we'll see where that goes, right? The hotspot is going to be continued. Russia and Ukraine. That is the hotspot. And Europe they've been at war. They've been sending basically NATO troops into Ukraine to fight. They've been there. That was the dirty secret of NATO in Kosovo, and the Americans were fighting there, and that got all cranked up in Saturn and Aries, right? So here we go again. By the time we're done with all of this, when Saturn moves into Taurus, it is the new world, it is the new land, it is the beginning of the new time. That's what's on the other side. There is no land, with the exception of Jupiter in Virgo, right, between now and 2030 with the outer planets. None. And it's only until 2030 where, the arc literally hits Mount Ararat. What do you want? You want food. You want food. All right, I was going to talk about the Saturn Pisces stuff. The Saturn current Pisces, but I'm going to leave that until next week because it's late. We're running out of time. And if I offended you with anything I said tonight, that was not my intent at all. My intent was to merely give you my observations of the boots on the ground, what's happening in the infosphere, taking the pulse, looking at the past, and showing you how these periods in Saturn and Aries were incredibly violent, matching it up to where we are now, bringing in the unfinished business and the ghosts of the Civil War and World War II. They're all part of this story. They're all part of the tale that we are telling, right? If you go back 30 years from 1968, you're in 1938, you're in the run up to World War II, right? It's happening. It's about to happen. When it does happen, it goes, right? It's like it goes global, literally. So next week, let's do this. Okay. I went kind of big picture. I kind of went, late 90s, 68, 69. I went big picture. Next week, what we'll do is I'm gonna get into Saturn and Aries. I'm gonna break it down for you, the individual, and what it means for you, not the collective, not the not United Corporation of America, right? Not the world, but for you. Okay, I'm going to break it down. I'm going to break down the combination of Saturn and Neptune for you and what that means in terms of achieving what I would say the approach of the Atma, right? Saturn-Neptune conjunction is the approach of the Atman. It is the refinement. It is the refinement of the individual through dedicated spiritual practice. And if you can do that, right, in the early stages of the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, you can set the stage for you. You can light the spiritual wick in your life, and it will burn through the entire Saturn transit through Aries. This is very intentional. This is very, very intentional. If you want to attain a high degree of spiritual discipline and awakening, it is there. It is there for the taking. And it is you, the individual, who will have to make very difficult choices in some ways in order to go there. Right? You may have to renounce alcohol. You may have to renounce, who knows? Maybe you renounce sexuality or sex, right? Maybe you renounce some kind of distraction. Like, I don't really care about sports anymore. All I care about is how I can consciously raise my vibration, right? Or raise my awareness to a higher level of vibration so I can match that vibration. That's what we're talking about. I think that the greatest potential for spiritual discipline and awareness, dare I say enlightenment, lies at the beginning of the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. And that's available for everybody. Everybody. And I feel like it's almost essential to dial into that so that we can get through the next 3 years, which I happen to believe will be quite intense. So we'll talk more about that next week on an individual level. Okay? All right. Thank you for being here. For those of you that managed to sit through my perhaps controversial tirade a bit, or at least controversial share. Thank you for staying and going the distance. And I just, before we close out here, I just want to reiterate, right? Want to reiterate that what I want for every individual that is in this realm, what I want for every individual is to realize that you are connected to the greatest universal mind that there can be, the greatest universal love that there can be. That would be my aspiration, to be able to connect with that. Every individual in their own way, right? We all win. All boats rise. Right? And I don't care about your skin color or your religion, but if you get to that point, and we all get to that point, and we can see eye to eye and heart to heart, right? The creeps that have ruined this fucking place from time to time, hit the reset button from time to time, pit us against each other all the time, they have no power over us, right? They have no power over us. And we are elevated and vibrating above the psychic bullshit that they put out. At the same time, I also recognize that there are differences amongst us. We're not all the same, right? It would be folly to think that or believe that. And a lot of those individual differences are going to get worked out here over the course of the next few years, right? And some of those individual differences, if they are built on some degree of injustice or manipulation or lies, it's not going to fly. Like, that's over. That is over. And once we all begin to recognize that sooner rather than later, we'll be able to get to that place of the universal mind and the universal love. We'll get there. Right. But in order to get there, we're going to have to work through some of this individual stuff. And a lot of it will not be pretty. But on the other hand, as long as you have the flaming sword of truth by your side, you'll be fine. Okay, that's it. I'm out of here. If you like the show, hit thumbs up. If you have not subscribed, please subscribe. And you can always order a reading from yours truly. It's one of my favorite things to do. I really enjoy working with people and going through challenging periods like this, because life goes on, right? You've got businesses, you've got kids, you've got aspirations, hopes, dreams. And that's what I'm good at doing. I'm good at working with people with that. What else? If you want, you can buy me a cup of coffee. Don't forget our friend Chris over at True Hemp Science. Mods, thank you very much for your participation. Chattoria, everybody else, you're all part of Chattoria. Love you all. Take good care of each other. Treat each other well. God bless. And bye for now.